Good evening. Welcome to Board of Selectmen. This is actually the Board of Public Works. This is a public info session. We're starting a little late. It is 6:12 p.m. Thank you for joining us. This is the call to order. Please note that, as usual, our meetings are being recorded for transmission by Rutland Public Access TV. And let's step right in. We'll do our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Purpose of this meeting tonight is to do an informational review of everything going on with our water sewer rates. If you note on the agenda, which is fairly short, we're talking about a public information session. We will take questions. Obviously, we'll be talking about rate structure and increases. Mr. Buckley has a document with some recommendations. We have Weston and Sampson here with us. Welcome. And then we'll be talking about the intermunicipal agreement just broadly in terms of the fact that it's coming up again. I think we're going to jump right in. And I think the biggest thing we probably need to do is maybe divide this into two, one of which is how much history do we want to get into tonight relative to sort of how we got where we got, which, of course, this meeting is very different from town meeting. We had 800 people. Now we have not even 8. But I think the concerns are still there. So we can talk about history and then and any questions that have come up, see if we answer all the questions or if we're going to have more questions that will come up that we can revisit at public hearing. And then we'll move forward to what we're possibly going to be doing as far as next steps. Okay. Thank you all for coming. Joe, I don't want to put you on the hot seat, but do you want to jump in and start?
I think it would be best to review what was accomplished at the town meeting.
Okay.
Because that's the kickoff for our next course of action.
Sure.
So, what did we accomplish at town meeting? You want to review the article just briefly?
Sure. So for everybody's edification, at town meeting we had an article that essentially was, let's see if I have it down here in my packet, that essentially was a request for the body to approve the fact that we were going to take our currently separated water enterprise and sewer enterprise accounts and combine them into a single enterprise account. What will happen from there is that any monies that were in each of them will cycle into free cash. They will need to be certified by the town, and at fall town meeting would then get placed back into what would now be a combined single water sewer account. The purpose of that, which one of the big reasons why we're here, is because we have a significant bill for sewer that we did not have enough sewer enterprise retained earnings to cover this year. Cyclically, this has been an issue now. This is our third year. However, it was nowhere near the level that it is this year. There were multiple questions that, certainly at town meeting, valid questions about what happens to people who are only ratepayers on the water side, what happens to people who are ratepayers on both, and what happens to people who are neither, who are not customers of either of the services. Hopefully, what was made clear that night, and if not, it bears repeating tonight and at the public hearing in a couple of weeks, is that there has not ever been a situation where a non-ratepayer was paying either a water and sewer bill. When we would go to town meeting in the fall for any overages that were required, we were taking that money from old articles or from sewer free cash. The other question pertained to how we are going to, quote, pay back the water ratepayers for the monies that have been conserved over the past 9 or so years. Those were monies that had been sort of saved up year after year in anticipation of some large capital projects. I think, Joe, to that end, we'll have you go into what I think we're headed towards relative to a change in the way we fund our capital expenditures for our two, for water and sewer. And we'll do that next.
I don't talk entire next.
We will.
Okay. Do you need me to get up, or can I
You
stay?
can absolutely stay right there.
Wonderful. A couple quick things, just to review what you just said. Obviously, you mentioned that we did not have enough retained earnings to cover the excessive wastewater charges we had for transportation and treatment costs. They shouldn't be paid out of retained earnings anyways. Retained earnings are meant for emergencies. We simply did not have enough money coming in to pay those bills. So a big part of the discussion is going to be, we need to raise the sewer rates to cover the charges we have out of town. In addition to that, you mentioned some capital improvements that were meant for the water that we were talking about doing in a neighborhood in town, and that you were hoping that we could save some of the funds for that. The capital improvements that need to be done in town realistically exceed what we're able to save over time, and we're gonna have to borrow and then recover that back. By means of example, at the time we moved the retained earnings from water to sewer to cover the sewer deficit, we moved about $700,000 from water and free cash into what's now the general fund. We have roughly $2.4 million in water work that has to be done over the next couple of years. And that took us 9 years to save it. The reality is we're gonna have to borrow some money. So the rate structure does two basic things. It allows you to borrow enough money to start to clean up the problems in your infrastructure, both water and sewer, and make sure you have enough money coming in to pay the bills. And that's what this document is meant to do. All right? You wanna talk numbers?
I think we're gonna skip over a little bit before we get to which numbers were you thinking? The rates?
The rate, so roughly, I can give you percentages, because we did approve budgets, at least water and sewer budgets were approved at town meeting, correct?
Yes.
All right, when the budgets were approved, they were approved with negatives. And what that means is there wasn't enough money coming in under the current rate to cover the bills that we have, our forecast for next year.
Right, in
So-
anticipation of the actions that are going to be
Right.
taken. Okay.
So to meet those budgets, we have to raise water roughly 5%. We're gonna say, go conservative and say as much as 10%. And sewer or wastewater would have to go up at least 25% from last year to this pending year.
Mhm.
Is that gonna level it, you think? I mean, this 25% hike, is that gonna sustain for fiscal 2021? What's that gonna look like? We're gonna keep jumping up and up and up, or should this fix it?
I wish I could tell you that it'll fix it, but I can't.
Does the jump put us in line with some of the surrounding communities in terms of their rates?
Does it put us in line? We have
Relative.
those numbers, and one of the consultants actually brought them, so we could probably give you some idea where that puts us, yes.
Okay.
Unfortunately, what put us in the hole this last time was we had really, really bad II and a very wet fall, and followed by another very wet spring. I can't predict the weather on that level. What I can tell you is if we stick to this rate structure and we start doing some more consistent investment in the system, hopefully it'll start to level off. Conservatively, I can't say with a straight face, this will be the only increase. We may be having this discussion again in a year from now. A lot of the factors that additionally play into it, we don't know how the agreement with DCR is gonna go. That rate structure is the biggest part of our wastewater bill. So we are still kind of wide open there.
How much of the proposed work is going towards addressing I&I?
The
Appears to be the root cause.
We drafted a capital plan, and most of that is on the town side, II. We still have to address inflow and infiltration in the DCR sewers.
Right.
And a lot of that comes down to the agreement that has to be negotiated roughly a year from now, next spring.
One of the things.
Unfortunately, there's just simply too many variables to give you a good answer on that.
One of the things I maybe back up a little bit is I want to talk about history, because I think we had a lot of questions about how in God's name did we get here, and they're fair questions. One of the documents you've got in your packet is a water and sewer rate review that goes back to 2005. And it's an easy thing to say now, clearly, that we didn't raise sewer rates enough. That said, when I look at this, October 105, our sewer rate was $4.45. In 08, we raised it to $4.80. In 10, $5.48. In 12, $6.20. In 15, $6.45. And in 18, $6.88. We were consistently raising rates. In retrospect, we did not raise them enough. When you look at the other document that indicates the Worcester bills, in 2015 the bill was $470,000. It was fairly stable in 16 at 470, actually slightly lower, 479.39 versus 475.70. In 17 it jumped to 567.104, an increase of 20%. And in 2018 it jumped to 643.939. And that was an overall increase, I think, you have 36.84%, Joe. I don't know if this was one of your documents, maybe?
I can't
Yeah.
remember. We've done a lot.
As of this point in 2019, and we are just about done, but we don't have quarter four bill yet, we are already at 593.074. So we can see that in 17 something significant was happening. When I went back and I was trying to think, how we had gotten here, and you have something else in your document that's actually the minutes from the town meeting of 2017. And the reason I bring that up, because we're going to go to Weston and Sampson next. In May of 2017, we placed an article. It was Article 15. I just lost my document. And it was recommended by the Capital Improvement Planning Committee. You probably remember, Harry.
I'm not sure exactly what you're talking
So I'll just read it for the record. It was to move that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $325,000 from the sewer enterprise free cash for sewer inflow and infiltration work, I&I work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the two capital projects that had been recommended that year. It was the only one that was under sewer enterprise. At that point, if you then refer to sewer expenditure documents, you'll see how quickly then we essentially used up our sewer retained earnings, free cash, and it had been our model. It was recommended by CIPC. It was recommended favorably by the Finance Committee. At the meeting itself, it was actually Mr. Becker that had made the motion, and it pulled our available free cash in sewer down close to the number that we are at right now. It was our model. We would save up retained earnings in anticipation of a largish project and then draw it down. And we went back to a letter from the Finance Committee in May of 2017, just before town meeting, and it was kind of part of this. The Finance Committee had sent a letter to Gary Kelleher, who at the time was the Department of Public Works Director, regarding planned usage of the excess funds. The committee noted that sewer and water rates should be set at levels sufficient to cover operating and maintenance expenses. Buildup of cash in the enterprise account, free cash, should be small, and if large enough, should be returned to users in the form of rate reductions. If not, will ratepayers receive refunds? One of the things I think you don't have in your packet that I can send to you all is the response from Gary, which was he felt strongly that there was not a significant amount of free cash being held over, and that in fact, based on the size of our programs, both for water and sewer, that if anything, they might have been a little bit low, and he certainly had projects that were coming in the way. That was when I look back and I think, okay, that's what we did in 2017. Had we not appropriated that money at that annual town meeting for that I&I, we would have had retained earnings to cover this bill. Would we still be in the same situation that we would need to raise rates? Yes. But would we have had to have done what we are now doing, the steps that we took at town meeting and the steps moving forward this summer? We wouldn't.
How did the board vote when CIPC recommended that?
The board absolutely supported it. Yeah. And Harry, I just, before you speak, and this is just me, so please, anybody who wants to jump in, please jump in. And I know Wayne just got here. What it made me think of all this past week when I realized, how we had gotten to that point and what the conversations had been at that point, were that had nothing happened with sewer in particular, had we had a drought instead of a rainy year, and we weren't seeing these astronomical bills from Worcester, and we didn't have this sort of emergent situation on the sewer side, we most likely would have gone ahead. And maybe not, we've also had a change, obviously, in leadership. So you might have requested this change anyway. But had we continued on the path we were going, we would have gone ahead, possibly as early as this spring, and spent or asked to spend at town meeting the money from water retained earnings in anticipation of the very large projects that Gary had planned that you're now looking at for some of our older systems, in particular for water. And then I think to myself, okay, we would have done that and it would have been this year. Had we then had something catastrophic happen to our water system, whether it was the water tank or something at the plant, we would be in the exact same situation with water as we are currently with sewer, which is we're not holding enough retained earnings to cover an emergency.
That's what they're for, not the capital.
Yeah, but
there was no way we could have seen this. We've been running sewer in a deficit for the last 3 years.
So yes, and again, you're right. But the deficit in 17, do we have that number in our packet? I think we do. The deficit in 17, I think at the time was considered almost I don't want to say it was a fluke.
It was
But
$145,000.
It was large,
Roughly.
and in 17, I think we were looking back, and here's the next part, and here's where I think we want Hillary and Pat to jump in. This is probably also part of your packet. Our original letter from Hillary and Pat was based on what we had started to see. Where is it? And it was February of 17 that you presented us with the information on the water sewer study. Is that right? Was it 17 or 18? I had that in front of me just now. I have a little too much paper. Here it is. No, it was a little later than that. It was February 16th, 2018, but we had been talking about it from the previous fall when we'd had to go to town meeting and yet again appropriate funding from assorted sewer sources to cover a bill that we couldn't cover, despite the fact that we raised rates in April of 2018. So, February 16th, 2018, you presented a water sewer rate study. It was talked about at a meeting in probably May. And then we had Margaret step away from the job, Gary leaving as of December. It was not addressed again until Joe came. Is that fair, Joe? When you came on, it was one of the things that you sort of pulled out and said, we need to go ahead and fast track this.
Only because I got
Scary bills.
Right.
I mean,
Scary bills. Yeah.
so we've heard like 18 different excuses now.
No,
as to-
not excuses. More of a timeline. Because you're right, Mitch. I'm sitting here. We were living through this. Wayne was here too.
Did
It's
we
just
ever
two of us
look
now.
at when the years we were operating in deficit? We obviously knew we were operating in deficit. Did we ever look at what other communities were using in terms of rates, or is that something that we didn't do until the study was commissioned?
We did not. This board never saw a lot of comparison of rates in other communities. It was
Why?
purely based on what we required in Rutland to run our systems.
Why didn't we look at best practice?
Well, I don't know if it's about best practice. Hillary, I know you work with other communities. I don't want to put you on the spot. But
Is
I-
looking at other sewer rates considered best practice? I
An
would,
issue of the CIPC,
Yes,
which,
I'm sorry.
may we address that now?
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Name and address.
Back then, we did approve that sewer infrastructure.
Yeah.
At the time, our fault, your fault, nobody's fault, doesn't matter at this point, it's hindsight. We did not have the information to address whether or not the sewer rates would be funding the sewer fund appropriately so that we could make that decision. Our purview is not to set rates, so therefore we can't have a future outlook. We have to go on what we think the sewer fund is going to be there. So when we approved that, we did not have the information that Worcester had stepped up that much of an increase and that we didn't keep pace with it.
Yeah.
So in not defense of the CIPC, but in deference to it, we did not have the information that if we'd had that, I'm not sure the outcome would have been the same.
I don't disagree, and I hope this isn't coming across as, well, let's share the blame. I'm trying to put together kind of a timeline.
This is not here, this is
Yeah.
hindsight, I'm not, but
Yeah.
I just want to say that in all fairness, the CIPC looks at every issue, but we didn't have the information to say, will this be funded next year or will be in tough shape? And should we address the whole 300,000 plus to the infrastructure, or should we address half of it? Because we didn't have the information of what it was going to look like in the sewer fund, we made the most appropriate decision without all the information. That's
Well,
all the comment I want to make. That's it. No blame, nothing here. It's just, and we're running into this in other issues too, not just sewer and water, so.
And
That's all.
you're right, Harry. And in fairness, who could have given you that information that we were about to see a spike, you know, a 3-year straight enormous spike, partially, you know, augmented by weather, but whatever, and that maybe the way we had been doing things was not going to work for us, short term, long term, whatever. We were following the protocol that we had been following for quite some time, which was build up reserves, draw them down for a project, and then spend some time building them up again. And we were all okay with it
And again,
until, yeah,
I'm not, this is not a comment on
No, I
blame
know.
whatsoever.
right.
It's a comment that in order for the CIPC and the town to function appropriately, perhaps we need to dig harder and request more information from departments that we didn't in the first place, okay? Because we had no idea that our job is to investigate sewer rates to make sure we had enough money.
And I don't know that it is. And I
It's
think,
really kinda mine.
yeah,
Huh?
It's
I-
kinda mine. It's my fault to me, and it's
Well,
something.
no, this goes back a couple of years now,
No,
so.
but going forward.
yeah.
I think, yeah, and,
So-
and I think going forward, and, you know, that's that sort of second part of this conversation, which is how do we change the way we're doing business for water and sewer, to say to ourselves, this is no longer the way we're gonna be using reserves. That is.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Oh, of course. Yes. And then I'll have Weston and Sampson.
I just want to ask a question.
Yeah.
First of all, can I ask questions during the thing, or do I have to get up at one certain time? Or?
Well, you know, it's a huge crowd,
Okay, no, I just don't want to, you know,
so we
go
might
out
have
of order,
to,
that's
we
all.
might have to take, no, go ahead. We'll try to do this back and forth.
So the question I have, if I could, is that when I take out a sewer connection permit, $1,000 of that permit goes to an I&I fund. When I pay my actual sewer bill at my house, because I have a well and I have sewer, I get charged an I&I charge. So are you saying that that's what you're considering to be excess capital?
No.
No.
So where's all
there's
the
a-
I&I money?
There's several questions in that. So I think, and this is just my opinion, and I think everybody should give their opinion on this one. I think we probably did a disservice to the ratepayers by dividing a bill to make it look as if there was a project, say a capital project, I&I, similar to the one that we passed together in '08, which was probably our largest one, the 5-year, multi-million-dollar project, and gave the ratepayers maybe an impression that this was a one-time thing. Because in point of fact, infrastructure is a constant process, and I think what we'll hear from Weston and Sampson is we probably don't spend enough money on it. We spend what we absolutely have to spend to keep the system running. So to your question, even the I&I debt was for projects that at this point are completed, and in some cases we have hit a 20-year cycle that they need to be done again.
So, but that didn't really answer my.
No, it didn't answer everything, I know.
He's
There were like
asking,
3,
Where's
yeah.
his investment go?
Like I said, that $1,000 that I pay for a connection permit, where does that go? Did that pay for past projects, or that, because I heard it was supposed to pay for future projects. Then the I&I that you pay on your actual sewer bill. The issue here is that you took money that, it looks to me like you took money to pay for actually clean water flowing down the sewer system. Now, my question to you is that the cause of the problem is I&I in sewer. Let's not even consider water for a second, because I don't know that we should be focusing on water before we focus on sewer, because I don't think it's as big of a problem. But I'm just one guy. So I lost my train of thought a little bit, but the point is that if you take the I&I out of the system and you allow people to add measured flow, now you have measured flow that you can actually bill, and if you're taking I&I out at the same time, you're gonna eliminate the problem of having to rate. You can't eliminate it right now because it seems as though we haven't done anything for the last 5 years to rectify the I&I issue. So I&I is causing the problem, but the answer is raise the rates and then don't fix the I&I?
No.
Because you gotta fix the I&I before you should, the I&I should be part of the whole thing, because the biggest part of the money that's being paid out is being paid out for I&I. Clean water running down the pipes.
So let's jump to one portion of that, which is, should we do an I&I history? Or did you have a plan, Hillary? of
Yeah,
some kind?
so, I mean, we have been looking at this system in a very calculated manner for maybe going back 10 years or so, maybe even more. We'd always been doing II projects here and there up until a certain point where we kind of decided to look at it from a more comprehensive, more managed approach, which seeks to perform some II removal, but it also is a little bit of an operation and maintenance methodology of kind of looking at everything, whether it needs it or not, to make sure that you are managing the system properly. So it's certainly something that we can, kind of assemble and put together for you a little history about what we have done. But to sort of reiterate your point about how this is a constant, it's a constant maintenance problem, I guess, is to continue to look for and remove inflow and infiltration. And it's a little bit of an arduous process because it would be nice to just go out and fix everything, but you have to figure out where it's broken first before you fix it, which is why we do investigation work and then repair work in a sort of modified fashion. So, we can certainly put together a history of what you've done and what we think you've removed.
We've done that already.
Yeah, I mean,
We sent it to DCR.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
we've
part
been.
of a requirement that's listed in that document, so
Yeah.
they've already got it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I control that.
The only thing I
Yeah.
would ask, sorry to interrupt you,
No,
could
go
you
ahead.
please explain what you're required though to do for I&I work under DEP regulation? CMR, blah, 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 we're also required. It's
right.
not just financial.
yes.
There
So
are legal
in addition to the common sense of trying to reduce flow that, to Clee's point, does not need to be treated or transported, we would like to keep it here instead of paying to send it elsewhere. The Department of Environmental Protection has a wastewater collection system set of regulations that you're supposed to operate your collection system in a certain fashion, and there's an II component to that. You're meant to have a plan, you're meant to be performing the plan and following up with DEP on an annual basis, reporting and things like that to let them know what you've been doing. And they don't necessarily prescribe in detail what you're meant to be doing, but you are to have a plan. They provided some feedback on we proposed to them what we're doing, and they provided some feedback, and we made some adjustments here and there, and you're meant to be following that plan.
Are we?
We're compliant.
So we are following the plan?
We are. I would say we're compliant at this time.
You have an II program, yes.
May I ask, has anything been implemented? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Has anything on that II plan been implemented? I looked at some numbers that I forgot whether it was you, Joe, who sent me or Gary sent me. Over the last 5 years, there've been absolute minimal I&I removed from the system. I think it was Gary that sent me the numbers. And that's the cause of the problem. So isn't that, whether we're compliant or not, but is it compliant to the point where it really helps the town?
I think a fair answer is there is no question the town of Rutland could be more aggressive in how much I&I and how much overall sewer work it does. I think, as most everybody knows, financially, the town, sort of across the board, has been kind of just in a position of putting out fires and holding the line, no pun intended. And I know when I started and we went to town meeting to sell that multi-million-dollar 5-year plan, that was a big sell. It was big. And at the end of the day, we did some of it, and not necessarily all of it. And that's probably a big picture question. I'm not sure how much in the long run it would have changed. I think there were 2 questions that Clee got to that I was trying to kind of parse out, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. One of them is, I think his sort of, maybe there was a broad question in there as to whether or not an increase in overall users would help offset some of our concerns in terms of, okay, we have a higher volume of users who are paying, the rate, and therefore they are, taking part in all the additional costs of maintaining the system as a whole. I think that was one of the questions.
I didn't hear that.
No?
Well,
Yeah, I thought I did.
yeah, kinda. You pretty much got the gist of what I was
I
saying.
did,
But
okay.
to the point that I'm making is, not only does it just pay for sewer that's going down, but it pays for, with the water and sewer bill, actually pays the water and sewer departments. So,
We'll keep those separate.
well, but that
They-
is part of the question.
Okay.
So those rates
Yep.
are paying the water. If you have more people contributing, then you spread the cost out over more users. That is part of the question.
Yes. So that was part of the question, more users. I do just want to clarify, though, it's not more water and sewer. They're completely separated. The rates are separate, the billing is separate, the structures are separate,
And the departments are separate.
and the departments are
Right, so the water rate payers pay for the water
Yeah.
department. The sewer rate payers pay for the
Yeah.
sewer department. So from a business standpoint, if you have more people contributing and you have, let's say you have $10,000 a month in costs, and you have 1,000 people contributing, or you have 2,000 people contributing, well, you're certainly gonna have a whole lot spread out, better cost to cover the cost than you are if you shut down the measured flow. The shutdown of the measured flow is going to takes away users which can contribute to this.
So whether or not to grow the system is not necessarily the first thing on our agenda, if only, just because of time sensitivity. But if there's anybody in the front row that wanted to respond to that, I think that was a relatively clear question, right? Is it fair to say that more users will help to offset bills? Is that what you heard too, Harry?
That's what I heard, but in difference, I'm not sure because there are always incremental increasing costs. So as you do things, if you add 2,000 more users, you're gonna incrementally increase the use of that water system so that it's not gonna be dollar for dollar. So if you have 10,000 and you add another 1,000 homes, your incremental cost could be 15,000. So it might reduce it a little bit, but it's not gonna offset it. That's where I'm saying I'm confused on what you're saying.
I would disagree with that because a pipe is a pipe. They don't have to do anything past the fact that it's going into the same trunk line that goes down. So you have a sewer department, and over the last 10 years, you couldn't have increased much because there's been a sewer moratorium since 2007 up until 2015, and now there's a new one. So at the point is that I couldn't get any new sewer extension permits because the city of Worcester and the DCR had a fight. So the DCR was supposed to do some work for them. But regardless of all of that, I don't know that increasing the amount of users is going to actually increase the cost exponentially. Joe, you can probably help with that from a standpoint of if you.
No, I don't mean
So-
exponentially.
Okay, so
So-
I think we all know, so I don't know if WS wants to answer, Joe, two of you, all of you together, tag team, answer that. The idea that, and again, I do think this is secondary, I mean, we're gonna have to talk about the rate structure no matter what, but the idea that, what does an increase in our system size do for us relative to billing? Is that that's probably the broadest way I can phrase it.
You
I'm
wanna take
thinking
a stab
on
at
it.
that?
Well,
It depends.
It
I
depends.
mean,
a lot of it goes back to how you pay the bills. So he is accurate, or he is correct if we were gonna say all of our transportation and treatment costs were one lump sum, one assessment. Like we pay an assessment to the Upper Blackstone. It's a quarterly assessment, that number never changes. And more ratepayers, yep, that would help to, spread some of that cost. But what's killing us, and the single biggest bill we pay, and is the one to transport it from Rutland through Holden and through Worcester to the treatment plant.
just based
Um,
on.
That's
a
all
flow
metered,
bit-
right?
that's a
Metered
flow-based
flow,
number.
So,
That's not metered flow.
Yeah, it is.
That is.
No, plus I and I.
Plus
You're
I&I,
paying
yeah.
for the, most of what you're paying for, I think there's more I and I than there is metered flow.
Can we,
I was trying to answer your question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
So, again, back to what I said, the single biggest cost we pay is the metered flow that goes into town. So, goes into Worcester. So, I don't know if more would help on that front.
do either of
If
you?
we had more of an assessment-based rate structure, then it would. But where we pay based on flow, not so much.
Do either of you wanna?
I mean, I agree. It's hard to really answer that question with a definitive yes or no. Of course, more users increases your revenue. That's fair to say. And yes, when you put a pipe in the ground and you don't have to spend much more money on that once it gets installed. But an increase in flow is a tax on the system overall. It leads to other operational issues such as, pump station pump station wear and tear is based 100% on flow. So you have more flow, you have more electricity, you have more wear and tear on pumps, you have more frequent replacement of pumps, for example. Whatever portion of your rates fund administrative tasks, yeah, that helps because those administrative tasks cost the same whether you have 10 users or 100 really. So it's a delicate balance, and I agree that the most effective, I think that the most effective way that you can try to manage costs is to remove II.
So
For a lot of reasons.
Have we ever looked at the marginal utility of usership? I mean, do we know what the apex number of users would be that would yield the most benefit without having to incur an elaborate amount of additional expenses, or is that something that's extremely difficult to calculate?
That would be extremely difficult to calculate because you'd have to really analyze which of those, users would be affecting pump stations, or which ones would be affecting pipes that might be nearing the end of their useful life capacity-wise and lead to overflows, and that causes,
There's too many variables.
that causes
We
reaction.
really don't
that-
want any overflows.
And we don't want any of those, but they cause money, they cost a lot of money, and emergency situations, they do smell, yes.
Can I ask a follow-up question on the DEP plan?
Yeah.
Where I think Selectman Stillings asked if we were following it, and then we heard, we're in compliance, wink, wink, nod, nod.
Well,
What is that? What is compliant? Does compliance mean we're following it? Does compliance mean we're not following it proactive? What does that mean, compliance?
We sent a letter to DEP with all the documentation, and this was before I got here. So this is just me getting caught up when I got here. So we sent a letter report to DEP, which was what was required, and in that included all the work, the II work that had been done in the time frame they asked about, and proposed work. And they wrote back and they had some concerns on a couple items, not a lot. And Weston Sampson in the previous administration made amendments and then replied, and DEP wrote back a second time and found that the adjustments that were made in the plan were adequate, so that we were in compliance with the law in question.
Okay,
Does that help answer your question?
it does. I would just hope that would be
And what I'm gonna
the
tell you-
first answer versus the we're in compliance answer.
Can I also just talk a little bit about what the DEP requires of you?
Sure.
So what Joe's talking about when it comes to us being in compliance, they required you to submit a plan by December 31st in 2017. You did that. They required you to have to do an II analysis by 2017. You've been doing II analysis all throughout the past almost 20 years. So we didn't have to actually do a separate project because we evidenced to them that you have a program, you've been following a program, so we're in compliance with that because you were already doing it.
Okay.
It also outlines some requirements that you're supposed to have as far as sewer connection and extensions and how you're supposed to manage those, and we're doing that. And it says that you are supposed to have a program, and you have a program. So it's not very specific about what your program is supposed to look like. We described it to them, and they said that looks good. So they really want communities to be doing something, and you are doing something. So they're less specific about box checking when it comes to implementing the plan itself. Does
I
that
can tell
help?
you
Does
that
that help?
every single community they looked at was different.
Yes,
And the
they're all very
and
different.
You didn't get form letters, they really went through every community individually and formulated a response. And there were some communities in the Commonwealth that actually pushed back because they were looking at millions of dollars they simply didn't have.
Okay. Thank you.
Help a little bit?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a good segue, but maybe we can focus on it a bit, because when we're talking about some of the bills recently coming out of the city of Worcester and that huge increase and what we were being billed for relative to what our meters were actually saying, and the central trunk line, and the conversations with DCR, who own the trunk line, or who manage, whatever we want to, the trunk line, I know we've heard already that you, I know, have addressed it with them, have been asking questions about what they've been doing for I&I, right? And where they are in their plan. Part of their response was, well, you know, whatever work we do, you're going to end up paying for it. And it was sort of a throwing back, right? A sort of, well, you sure you want us to do this work? To Mitch's sort of wink, wink, right?
Yeah,
You
we're just
sure
gonna
you
send
want
you
us to
the
do
bill.
this? Because this is going to be expensive. I wonder if you could speak to that. I think it probably addresses a little bit too of what Clee was asking as well, which was, why are we fixing II, right? And some of it isn't ours to fix necessarily, but we'll get billed to fix it. Could you?
And we also don't know how much of that I&I is our responsibility and theirs.
Right.
So it could be a lot less our responsibility than theirs. We don't know that.
Well,
But the question remains, what's being done?
Yeah.
What's being done,
And on their part,
or
very
going
little.
to be done?
Go.
Go as simply as I can. So, the Department of Public Works in Rutland owns a bunch of sewers that service 1,600 homes or customers. It flows from that network of pipes into some pipes that are owned by DCR. Then it flows to the outside of town at the Holden line, goes through a meter, then it flows through Holden, Worcester, and into the treatment plant. We're billed on what's at that meter. With the flow that goes through the meter, that's what we're billed for. We know we've done II work on the pipes that I mentioned that service those 1,600 customers. That chunk of pipe in the middle that's owned and operated by DCR, we don't know what they've done. And what I've been doing is asking a lot of questions about that. It is mentioned in the intermunicipal agreement between DCR, the town of Rutland, city of Worcester, and the town of Holden. There is some accuracy to what they said, because maintenance on the pipelines that I just mentioned, that cost is passed on to us per the agreement that we signed. And when I push back with them regarding II work they've done to date, one of the comments, they did come back and say, well, had we done that II work more diligently like you're asking, they would have passed that cost on to us as operation and maintenance costs. Still, if they had done that, we may not be where we are right now. These are items or issues that we're going to bring up when we negotiate with them next May to try and get a better agreement and a better decision for the town overall. I hope that covers it.
Did you have your hand
Yeah.
up, Scott?
What's the difference in gallons between two meters, between a 1,600 users and the meter at town?
This last fall, for every 1 gallon we billed, town residents, they billed us for 3.5.
To answer your question, huge.
Huge,
Yes.
huge.
And we openly told the administration at DCR that information. Unfortunately, Mike Nicholson can't be here, but he got in touch with the state rep and the state senator, and they both went to DCR and DEP to try and get some help with this, and we haven't gotten help with this.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And Scott, I think
Now,
what's
the-
happening with all of our hindsight 2020, this is one of those things. should we have hammered DCR to do that work and bill us?
DCR owns half the town. That's the problem too, with no taxes
Well,
on it, so.
Should we have hammered DCR to do this work to the tune of, I don't know how much, maybe Pat will tell us how much, we have no,
Only the sewer users should pay for it. If you can't connect to
well,
it,
yes,
I mean, you took $700,000 from water people.
not yet.
But, well,
We'll talk about that next.
But you are. I mean, if the sewer rate has to jump 50%, it jumps 50% because they're using it. If you don't pay your electric bill, I'm not paying it for you.
Well, the proposal is,
but
it's gonna jump 50%, and we're gonna have to take money to pay the bills.
balanced budget. Whatever the bill is, it has to pay. I mean, people don't want to hear it, but it's a sad thing. And
No, well, there's more to it than, do you mind if I jump in? A couple quick things.
Yep.
If we don't pay the bill, which we.
Oh, I know. You're gonna take Chapter 90 money and all the other stuff.
We are.
I know all that.
We are current,
Mm-hmm.
and DCR did send us a bill and ask for those funds right away, or they
Right.
go after
Right.
state aid.
Right.
So you're kind of squished, and you can't
Yeah.
borrow that money.
Right. I know that.
All right.
I know that.
So, you had just said we wouldn't be where we are right now if they had done those improvements, or is that?
We don't know.
free.
We simply don't know.
Well,
We'd like to think we'd be better. if they
Because
had-
Yeah.
since we sat down, I've heard 15 different reasons as to why we are where we are right now.
there might be more than that, Mitch.
And I'm wondering if we're raising the rates and we don't fix the root problem, it doesn't make a difference.
Well,
It just makes it cost more.
Hold on one second, let me do him and I'll come back.
okay.
Harry Seckman, 13 Beechwood Drive, I didn't notify. Mr. Buckley, I just
Sure.
want to say thank you for one very important thing in that contract between Rutland, Holden, and DCR. What you're saying, and clarify if I'm wrong, is they own a specific portion of the trunk line,
Yep,
they maintain it,
yes,
we have no oversight on it,
no,
we don't tell them how to fix it,
no,
we don't have anybody on site when they fix it,
no,
and they bill us for the repairs.
yes,
And they're not cooperating with us at all right now.
pretty much.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay. For the
Because,
townspeople, just to make sure they know.
Mitch, this is where we look back and say, okay, if we had, you can't force DCR's hand, but if we had yelled and screamed enough and whatever we would have done to get DCR to put in the money, put in the work to fix that trunk line, and then we would have billed our residents X number of years ago, would we be in the same place today? It just wouldn't be as emergent. It would be fixed. The sewer ratepayers would have been paying quite astronomical bills starting before now, but we'd have some repairs done that haven't been maybe done yet, but we don't actually know.
to answer your question, I've worked in the wastewater field for some time, and I have to tell you frankly, until you get in there and look at it and do an II evaluation of those sewers in question, there's no way to quantify that. What I can tell you is they've got a lot of pipe that's 80 to 90 years old that's in their control, and I'd like to think there may be some leaks, but I don't know.
You had a follow-up.
I mean, of that difference between the 1 gallon to 3.5, does Weston and Sampson have an idea how much of that's on our trunk line? Through the research that they've done?
It's tough to break it out because of the way that the collection system is configured, because there's a lot of different tie-in points into the DCR interceptor lines. So what we've looked at for flows in the past, we have had meters on the outgoing lines. So in order to differentiate the actual I&I in the trunk lines, you'd probably need to install 20 meters, which is not cost effective. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. However, what we could do and what we did do during the last flow metering study that was done in 2013 was we were able to isolate 5 of the major sub areas in town and look at the town-owned pipes to see what we were looking at for extraneous flows in those areas and come up with the annual program to strategically attack each of those sub-areas based off the highest II values first and work our way down through the system.
Okay.
Though that analysis does include the pipes that go through those sub-areas that are owned by DCR. So it's a little bit of an art to maybe try to parse out how much of the excess infiltration in a given sub-area is attributed to the pipes that are owned by DCR. There's really no way to do that without, like Pat says, a micro sort of analysis of individual pipe segments. I think that the best thing that we probably could do is just assign percentages, but it would be all theoretical. It would not be based on any measured flow. It would be, this sub-area has a certain amount of infiltration, and the DCR pipes comprise 5% of that, of all the pipes within that system, and therefore we could assume that. So, it's a very theoretical approach, and
it throws out the fact that we only know what work we've done. So when you assign that percentage, the DCR section might only be 5% of the pipe, but it might be 20% of the problem because that pipe's condition.
Right.
Okay.
There are investigations that could be done on those lines to determine television inspection, cleaning television inspection and floor isolation during the springtime, where you could get accurate numbers
better numbers,
yeah,
Yeah.
better numbers,
Measured, which
we've done.
measured numbers
Right.
on those.
And you've done them on your pipes.
Yep.
In certain circumstances, but not the DCR
Can you
pipes.
do them on DCR's pipes?
No,
No,
Can you ask permission for it?
no,
no.
I mean, DCR, we know doesn't cooperate, but
no, we
No.
have tried that.
That's a fair question.
It
Are we
is.
sure that there is no possible way that DCR would agree to have a host town, I guess I'll call it a host town, take over at least an inspection? Is it worth asking?
I believe that there have been times when we have asked for permission to access their manholes and their pipes via their manholes, and they've granted permission in certain circumstances. I
It
think,
was
Yes.
specific.
Very specific
Yes.
manholes to install a meter.
yes. And there also have been times when we inadvertently, inspected some of their sewers, because as you know, Weston and Sampson doesn't actually do the television inspection work. We hire a subcontractor, and we give them direction, and we
You leave
oversee
somebody on
them.
site.
But sometimes, they get ambitious and they've tried to TV inspect DCR pipes by mistake, and we've gotten phone calls.
So there were repercussions? Or we
They
didn't have
asked- yeah,
permission?
Yeah,
Or even to access a manhole that town sewer is tributary to, but the manhole is owned by DCR. In order to clean the pipe, you clean from downstream to upstream, so in order to access it and clean it, you access DCR manhole, and then there was an issue with that, even just to
Yeah.
access it.
so, yeah.
Hold on one second, did you
Yeah,
have a
well,
follow-up, or you want me to go to?
Nope.
Okay, Cleve.
So just quickly, one of the biggest sticking points, I remember, because the DCR contract got signed as a result of my lawsuit a long time ago. The town actually took over that lawsuit. One of the biggest sticking points was they wanted us to take over the maintenance of their line. And we wouldn't. We gave them the finger, which is the right thing to do. So at the end of the day, they want you to take over the maintenance of the line, but it would cost the town way too much to do that. So it's something that they should do if you're paying them to use it. If you're
They
paying
want us
them
to
the
take it
fees to
over,
use
but if
it.
they maintain it, they're gonna charge us for it anyway.
Right,
So what's the difference?
that's what I'm saying. But we wouldn't sign it. We wouldn't take it. So, I mean, they want you to take over the maintenance of that line, but I agree with the town. Let them take it.
Is that true?
It's there.
I was not
I wasn't
involved in
here.
any of those discussions or that
Were you
was
there?
not something that we participated in.
That wasn't part of the negotiation, Cleve, at the end?
They were very strict about that when we were fighting with them.
So, in point of fact, one of the holdups was that Worcester did not want to talk about the issues we had with the agreement at the time, which we felt were minimal, because they had projects that they wanted done and held that entire process up until those projects got done, and they were essentially holding DCR's feet to the fire.
Blame Joe for that.
Newton Square, what were the other two, Joe?
Cambridge
Newton
Street.
here,
Cambridge Street,
Brosnan Square,
Brosnan.
which is at the end of Cambridge.
Yeah.
Those are the two big ones.
There were three though.
There's
So
one in Park Ave.
Park Ave, maybe that was it. So, it dragged out for a long time because nobody was willing to move until those projects were done, and the projects
Well, they didn't
were.
have, it was legitimate, they simply
I'm
didn't
sure,
have
it absolutely was. Yeah, and I don't wanna, I don't wanna give an impression that that Worcester didn't need the work. They were clearly having major sewer infrastructure issues. I do not blame the city for the steps that I think they felt at that point they needed to take, just take that hard line. But we were caught, not even in the middle, it's like we were caught outside the beginning. Okay. For the
Hopefully some of this will be settled in the next round of negotiations.
Hopefully.
Why do we want to sign a contract with them anyway? No one else does. Holden hasn't in 100 years.
Holden has a separate issue going on, and I'm not sure how much information we'll be able to get out of it. They have an ongoing
It's the fight with
litigation
the city, right?
situation.
It's with the city and how much the city charges, and that what reason they won't sign it?
Yeah, I don't know all the details. Obviously, they're in litigation, so, and you know what, West Boylston is part of this too. We're not alone in this.
And I wouldn't sign it.
Just to jump ahead quick on the agenda, what I can tell you is one of the things myself and the town administrator decided was in preparation for negotiations, we would ask town council to review a scope or a list of things. And one of the items on that scope is to provide us with a brief or an update on the Worcester suit.
Oh, great.
So we get that before we go in.
Okay. I don't think it's in our box. It used to be. Just to get back to something that Clee said, asking why we would have ever signed it. As it stood, we were not going to be granted any extra sewer capacity. And in point of fact, Worcester was attempting to hold us to a single number for 5 straight years, as opposed to an incremental increase over 5 years. We literally had come down to one little Excel piece of a spreadsheet on one page of a, 30-page document that was the sticking point. And because, as you remembered, we were in the moratorium because of DCR's pressure saying you're already over and you not only need to do I&I work, but Worcester's not going to give you more capacity in the sewer lines. That was the fight. That's why we signed, because ultimately we did get the picture that we wanted. And that's when you look at the intermunicipal agreement, it's addendum B maybe, it might be A. I'm sure Joe will find it right now, showing that 5-year incremental increase that caps out at 2020.
But the history of that, just so you know, Rutland was always guaranteed 0.63 million gallons a day. And they misinterpreted a Weston and Sampson report done in 1994 that said it was
B.
0.495, which was the initial flow. That's why we went to court with them. We took them to court originally.
I appreciate your take on it. Worcester didn't feel that way, so.
Yeah, it was all the
Worcester-
DCR.
No,
They just
Worcester,
wanted their work done, which I don't blame Worcester for that.
nope. So, anyway, there's a little bit of history in why we signed the agreement. We did ultimately get our Table B. It turns out it was Table B.
0.63 is the right number.
For anyone who's here and we've been talking, asking questions, talking about certain things, and I have a list of items that I think, we need to make sure are very clear for all of our ratepayers. Is there anything we haven't addressed yet relative to kind of beating to death the whole history? And we can go back more if we need to. Or should we now move into that next phase, which is steps moving forward?
Let's move on.
Well, step moving forward is regarding the rate? or-
Yeah. Well, the rate and the process now for what
I think we
We
need
might-
to describe the process.
would you like to do?
No.
Have we identified the problem before we move forward? I mean, we talked about the history, but
Well, we've identified multiple, you're like, there's like 15 things here. You're right. It's really complex. We have a bunch of problems. We have an I&I program that we, as the Board of Public Works, can decide to get more aggressive with if we want. That will increase rates more. Now, Joe has, I think you have in front of you, the 5-year plan that includes some of the capital work that's going to get done. But to your point about, have we solved the problem? There's one. Second would be DCR and the trunk line. There's number 2. Third would be the intermunicipal agreement, which isn't exactly a problem yet, but it's going to be a problem really soon. And do we know what we want yet? I would say we don't. we sort of, have a framework about where we want to head, but we don't necessarily know the details. And then we have the issue of, and to the point I think, Scott, you just brought it up about, we know that this whole idea of taking money specifically from the water users has been a huge sticking point for people. And in point of fact, we haven't actually done it yet. So we could continue to have that conversation. We don't have to do it. One out of those options that I think you got the documents from Joe, half of them were don't use the money, just raise the rates more. So we've got a lot of.
We're just gonna stay on sewer for now?
Yeah.
Well, I guess he said he was gonna want to go up on water rates 10%. Well, there's already a surplus in water. Why is it going up 10%? To cover the sewer bill? So it doesn't go up 35?
Actually, a lot of it's electricity.
Okay, I'm just, that's.
No,
But you know what I'm saying?
And the budget's
Fair question.
already gone, it's a
Yep.
fair question, the budget's already gone through the finance committee and they approved it and they asked a lot of those same questions.
Okay.
A
I mean,
lot,
as long as you can show where it went, and it wasn't
Yeah.
to offset the other side so the sewer people didn't get hurt.
No, most of that's just cost, it's not, it's not subsidizing sewers. Most
No,
of it's
absolutely.
electricity.
Okay.
But the budget's gone through the town's budget process for any department, and we recommended increases, so.
Can I ask just another fast question? So in regards to I&I, have you identified, could you easily take out 100,000 gallons of I&I? Have you identified that much?
That sounds like a Hillary.
That's a
Question.
great question. I love questions like that. So, as you know, II removal is a little bit of an art rather than a science, because if we had an unlimited amount of money, then we would just replace all the pipes and we'd be down to a very small amount of infiltration. It would always still be there. But we need to balance the sources that we have and the type of sources that they have versus how much money is available. And we perform a cost-effective analysis. So we go and we TV inspect a sewer, we identify every crack and every leak, and we quantify every leak. And then we have to say, okay, well, this is how much money it's worth it for you to invest in removing this flow, because it might be cheaper to pay DCR to take it than it would be to repair it. So
That's a big statement.
it is a big statement, but that's
Okay.
part of the analysis, because you don't have an unlimited amount of money. So in certain circumstances, the cost to repair might be more expensive than it is to just leave it the way that it is for now. And there's always for now.
There's only one thing I would add to that. If you come across a repair that affects service, and what I mean by
Exactly.
service, roots or blockages or something that could
Yes.
cause a backup in someone's house,
Yes.
or wastewater to bubble up out of a manhole and affect drinking water,
Mhm.
doesn't matter what it costs.
Exactly.
We fix that. And I just wanna make sure,
Mhm.
because people are watching,
Yes.
that's clear.
Yeah, so part of the analysis on which things we fix has to do with cost, and a part of it has to do with operation and maintenance. If we see a collapsed sewer, there's not a drop of infiltration coming in it.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, it needs to be fixed. That's the benefit of the type of project that we're working with here, is that we're looking at everything and we're addressing these types of operational things for his department that make things easier for him, so he doesn't have to operate in an emergency situation. And also to find and fix inflow and infiltration. So to get to your question is that, yes, we've identified 100,000 gallons per day of infiltration sources that exist in town, yes. But it might not be worth it to fix them all, and you probably don't have the money to fix all the ones that you wanna fix.
So if we took that 100,000 out, just a follow-up question to that. And I built in a lot of towns, so they've said to me, look, take out 2 for 1. If you want to put in 10,000 gallons of sewage, then take out 20. So it costs developers a whole lot less than it costs the town to remove I&I, but you get permits for it. We did that in Rutland when the DCR had a shutdown back in the 80s. But to that point is that it's a whole lot cheaper, like I said, for us to do it than for you to do it. And we've been in towns where they've actually reduced the permit fee by the amount of money that it costs you to fix it, because that permit fee doesn't really, that connection permit fee goes for fixing the stuff, and if you've gone ahead and fixed it. So it might be a way Well, all I'm saying to you is, I can fix this stuff a whole lot cheaper than you can fix it. And if you would be willing to work, give me permits to remove some I&I and then take it off the permit connection fee, maybe half for one or whatever. I mean, why couldn't the town work with a developer to do something like that?
So is that a question that we need to circle back to? Do you guys want to respond to that now?
I think what Clee's asking, would we consider development of a sewer bank at some point, correct?
No.
I don't know what you mean by that.
No.
I'm sorry.
He's asking if he can do the work.
No. Yeah.
Well, no, I
kinda.
think he was speaking for contractors in general.
Yes, I was.
I don't think he was speaking as like a lobby more. So,
Okay.
would we consider developing a program where if contractors were willing to do work in town to eliminate II, would we open up possibly additional permitting? Because we're currently in a moratorium.
Yes.
So as a means of getting work done in town, and it's a win-win in theory. So we get II work done and they get access to more flow for permitting purposes.
Based on the work that's being done.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
did I get that?
Based on the work
Yeah.
that they would do.
Right.
Yes. Done everything.
That seems like a win-win.
How does
In
that,
theory,
in theory,
In theory.
how does that work in practice?
Can I
can
help with
answer
that?
We do it all the
Yes.
time.
no, please do, please do.
So you would have to develop a policy or a program so that this is implemented fairly across the board. It's a one-pager, this is how we're gonna handle this, so that's step number one. You also would need to identify what your ratio needs to be. What makes it worth it for you to shed this problem and put it on them and allow for a connection? Is it not 2 to 1? It's 4 to 1. Or maybe 10.
You think I'm gonna start at 10 to 1?
I know where you're starting.
That's where we're
I'm
gonna
gonna
start.
I should have said
10.
1 to 1.
We'll meet in the middle. But it's probably more like 4 to 10, okay? And that isn't all that easy to achieve, because you would end up having to remove a lot of flow for your small contribution. And I would also present that, like I talked about before, we analyze these individual sources to make sure that they're cost effective. So that the town, if they're gonna be investing their own town funds, one way or another, they get all the cost effective repairs, because those are the bigger, you get the bigger bang for the buck. So the developers tend to get, and this is in practice in other communities, the developers tend to get the sources that aren't as cost effective. So it might not be cheaper for you to do the work
In the town?
than the town.
It's always cheaper for me to do the work in the town.
On an hourly,
That's not a
on
good
an
sign.
hourly wage
I wouldn't
basis,
have maybe,
on an hourly wage basis, yes, I would agree that that's true. But you might end up having to do a lot more work to achieve less flow removal than the town would have to do, based on the cost effectiveness of the repairs. So I just want to caution that it might not seem as rosy as you're making it sound.
It's worth investigating.
It is worth investigating, and other communities do this
Could you
all the
tell
time.
us some other communities that you're aware of that do
Yes,
it? I mean,
yes.
are there?
Yes, there are many, yes. I would also advise that
No,
you,
would you have some examples?
oh yeah, the town of Walpole does this, specifically, yes, the town of Walpole does this. They have a list of repairs that need to get done, and a developer comes in and there's a calculation that says that you are going to be contributing 1,000 gallons per day to the system based on Title V flows. And
Was that
that
There you
was
go.
not a question.
Don't, somebody asked me
Not a
if I needed the
question.
gavel, and I said no, so, okay.
I asked it.
You're right, it was Joe.
I like, that was fun. Based on-
Glad you enjoyed that.
I did. Based on a certain amount of flow, whatever your calculation is, you're going to be discharging 1,000 gallons per day. So you have to remove 4,000 from somewhere else. Here's the list, and then they connect the developer with us to help guide them through the process. So we don't, we tell them you should do this work here. You should do this type of repair. So we basically design the repair for them to make sure that they're not just doing whatever they want, they're doing what the town wants, we're acting on behalf of the town. and then we help them get quotes to do the work from reputable contractors, and then we oversee the work to make sure it's done in accordance with that specification and the town's desires, and then we, certify that the work has been done, we oversee and make sure that it's been done, and the contractor pays or the developer pays the contractor directly and pays us directly. So the town is getting what they need without really having to be all that. They administer the process, obviously, but they don't collect a check or anything. That all gets.
So it sounds like the success of this is predicated on the structure and how much the town works to ensure that that document protects itself.
Yeah, it does, and it also depends on it depends on what kind of sources you want to give away. So when I say source, I mean like infiltration or inflow source. And like I said, if you want to allow a developer to come in and sort of get all the cost-effective heavy hitter sources, well, that's a great deal for them, but then you guys end up with a lot of repairs that need to be made that aren't really cost-effective. So that's the part that's a little bit of a negotiation and a dance to make sure that you're not, sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face when it comes to the II work that you are doing yourself. Another option for that type of program is to get developers to do work on private property. There are private inflow sources.
Really?
This wise now.
It's only 7:20. I don't know.
Everybody's service connection that discharges into the main line is subject to relatively the same amount of infiltration as the main lines. They don't tend to be as deep and they're not as big, so they're not as much of an issue, but there definitely is infiltration coming in through private service connections. Also, you have sump pumps in town that kick on every time it rains. And while that doesn't necessarily have a very big impact on the annual average, it does have an impact in areas where you've got excessive flow due to high rainwater and things like that. So it's nice to get developers to help remove those sources, because that's always been a big challenge for every community in all of Massachusetts, that private inflow is the last thing that gets handled, and it usually only gets handled when you're very desperate. If there's another way that you can get that work done with a partnership, then that's usually a win-win for everybody. So there's a lot of options there.
So relative to where we are in this big process, relative to what you all know about our system and how it is already structured, is it a good fit for us?
I think there
There's
are
some
some things
potential.
that we can do to come up with a plan that might be beneficial.
Okay.
But again, that would have to comply with the moratorium situation.
Right.
Because if you aren't allowing any more connections, then that isn't a possibility.
Right.
But you could justify it if he's fixing part of the problem.
Possibly.
You're coming back in 2 weeks, though, right? Yeah.
What was that?
It seems like a win-win if you get a public-private partnership to fix some of these issues. And, now we're proposing rates to raise on folks, it's going to equal at almost $250 a year for folks. I think any way that we can provide relief to some of these issues, I think, is worth exploring at least. I think that's certainly something we should look at.
Hillary, why do you think we haven't done it in the past? Is it just because our system isn't really that old and it's grown very quickly?
Well, so your issue hasn't ever really been excessive inflow sources, because you're seeking to reduce that baseline.
Yeah.
And that's really, infiltration is really the target that you want to look after for that type of removal. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't remove that flow, inflow sources and things like that. But again, they all occur, most of them occur on private property. I think the town doesn't have any public inflow sources that we're aware of. We've done smoke testing, we've done building inspections. We did building inspections back in 2005, maybe. I don't know, I might be just completely making that up as
No,
far
it
as.
might be on
It was,
Yeah.
It was a while ago.
Yeah.
It was quite a while ago, and you know, you end up with a list of places where you have sump pumps, and you maybe call people up and tell them that they have to remove them, and they say sure. And maybe some do, and maybe some don't, and maybe they, you know, so that is that's just, those private inflow sources are the last thing that anyone wants to deal with. They're really hard. It's not an easy thing to tackle.
It's illegal, by the way, to tie in a sump pump. And that's what's happening,
It
they
is.
put them right in the sewer.
Yeah.
I just wanna make a comment on it.
Well,
Yes.
there's some clarification on that. Now, if it's a sump pump that's only taking groundwater from below the foundation, you're correct. If it's a sump pump that's pumping out a basement, where anything that was stored, such as paint, oils, or other debris stored in the basement, that can wash across the floor and into that sump pump, then that actually can go to the sanitary sewer. Depends on what it is you're trying. Do you see my point?
I've never known that. Okay,
Mhm.
I stand
Good
corrected.
job.
It's not
I-
that simple.
Clearly, we're mostly focused on sewer. Scott, I just wanted to address with the water, you asked a brief question about the rates, and just to let you know, so the rate structure for water historically has been flat. In '08, it was $3 for the first 500 cubic feet. I won't give all the numbers. It was raised in 2010 from $3 to $3.36. It has not changed. And moving forward from FY19, that $3.36, again, that's that last tier, it's going to go from $3.36 to $3.70 is the recommendation, and that will come up at the public hearing. We can give any of those numbers to anybody. There was a question, was it you?
I did.
Okay.
I just, what came to mind in the conversation about, kind of, we were talking about mitigation in the soil use regulations. Aren't there some mitigation references to removal of inflow infiltration as part of the permitting process?
I believe there are.
And so the question having to do with that was how that's being managed.
I think the regulations say at the discretion of the director or superintendent. So it's, the door's open for that type of, you don't have, I don't think that you would have to go through any additional regulatory process.
Right.
But I do strongly suggest that there be, you know, a well thought out program, policy, plan, whatever you wanna call it, that everybody's aware of and that everyone agrees to, so that it's evenly distributed amongst all the developers and not,
Okay.
subject to a whole lot of discretion of the director within the confines of
That would be in
that.
my best interest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
within the confines of the policy of the program.
But somebody brought up a very good point, because CART doesn't, the current moratorium wouldn't allow that to happen anyways. The
Right.
moratorium would have to be rewritten regardless.
It would be, yes.
Well, if you have a plan or something to propose back to the board, it'd be nice to hear that before the next moratorium meeting.
I think that's longer than a 2-week process. Again, I think
Or
it's,
maybe just a
Yeah.
direction on what you're
Yeah.
thinking, or between you guys and Joe.
I mean, we can certainly put to paper some suggestions, some ideas, some things that other communities do, to help you. But the the development and implementation of a program is gonna be a little bit more involved than that. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It would be up to you guys on how involved you would want that process to be.
Or
You
at
could
least-
just decide right now what you wanna do, I mean.
Well, I mean, you're the experts in the room,
I would
so we
suggest that
wanna,
there be a little bit of a process where you get some stakeholder input and that type of thing, you know, convene some sort of, you know, workshop type of meeting with, you know,
Potential.
one or two of you guys, somebody from the department, somebody maybe from planning, something like that, to just get different perspectives on what might work. And then, you know, we do a draft of a plan and then you make edits and accept it. That type of process is usually what we're looking at.
okay.
Be nice to see what's being done out there.
Would it almost make sense to at least release as many new sewer connections as you do building permits? Just keep them hand in hand
Well,
until you decide where they're all
we're over
going.
capacity, that's the
Well-
problem.
I mean, again, as I think everybody's now said, it's not just one particular issue. I think over the past X number of years, Scott, those, in most cases, have gone hand in hand because there was just an expansion of the sewer system as needed wherever it needed to go, pump stations, you name it. They don't necessarily have to go hand in hand. And that gets back to the districting discussion that we've been having for the past year.
Number of building permits per year
Yep.
should go hand in hand. 'Cause
But again, not all the building permits will require water sewer. So I see what you're saying, some of them will.
At a minimum, because it's a failed system, it's an automatic connection, you can't stop it. So we don't care about a failed
Well-
septic system can automatically connect, period.
Well, not if it's out of the district,
No.
right?
Well, unless it goes to an E1. An E1 can pump out of a district.
If my septic system
Yeah,
fails
you're
tonight,
screwed.
there's no sewer for me. That's,
Right,
I can know that
right,
for
you're
sure.
too far away.
Yeah.
Right.
Are you too far away?
No,
You're not?
I can go over the bridge.
Oh, great.
I actually have one. I actually have connections already paid for.
Okay.
But it just seems like, again, if you're doing them, they kind of go, because you're limiting, not every building permit's gonna need one, but
Okay,
Instead
so
of-
that sounds like a discussion more for the sewer district. Is that fair? Whether or not we're districting or not, because I think that would partly answer that question, right? If there's a district, it's separated then from building permits.
I'd like to speak to that because frankly, I think they're separate and distinct.
Yeah,
Because the growth or the limited number of building permits is regardless, you could do it with well and septic. And the document was written that way. And that would mean they're not the same. So you're able to build a parcel with well and septic, and that's considered one of those building permits, and that has nothing to do with water and sewer capacity issues. So you could by means of example, you could tie up all of the building permits in well and septic construction and have nothing to do with water and sewer at all. So that's why I think they're separate and distinct.
But if what's stopping you from building in a district that exists is you can't put a sewer in,
I thought you were talking about the current
but as a moratorium, you can't do it. So
the
right
moratorium,
now,
yes, but you were.
but right, if you're right now, you're in a spot that.
But you tried
could-
to link it to building permits.
Yes. So say you have a buildable lot
Yes.
in a spot that could have sewer, but there is no connection on. You can't build that because you can't get a sewer permit. You could get a building permit, but you can't get a building permit because you can't get a sewer permit, so you can't build it.
You could put a septic in.
Not if there's not enough room again.
If the lot's not
That's-
large enough.
I mean, that's some of the
Separate-
lot lines,
but that's
a lot of
kind
them
of a
older.
separate issue.
So that's kind of what I'm saying is you'd relieve some of those odd lots and they could actually build them. I mean, you're not gonna get 36 connections, obviously, or whatever the
yeah.
number of permits
I
is.
think, Scott, we got too far away from it. I see where you
Okay.
were headed, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that that's exactly been our pattern for quite some time, right? They were kind of moving in parallel, not together, not connected, but they were moving in parallel.
But there was no limit on building permits before.
There was no limit really on sewer until we were limited by the state, and now, again, in discussions of how much the town can bear relative to a larger, more advanced sewer system, and where you draw those lines.
According to the bylaw, though, how many building permits are we limited to?
36, plus all the exceptions.
Okay.
But there's the exceptions run through one section, but then there's also a scenario where the planning board can give a special permit that would take you above and beyond the 36, because there's kind of a little bit similar discussion about this sewer bank, where if a planning board felt that a particular project provided a benefit to the town, it could be given permission, and then that would get back to, okay, well, is it a project that's within the sewer district, which we don't even have yet? We have where we have sewer currently, right? Would you expand the sewer system in order to accommodate it because of its, yeah. But yeah, I do think we're getting probably a little off, to Joe's point, you were talking, Joe, about what we can already require. It's, if anybody wanted to reference it, and this document is up online when talking about the sewer extension rules and regulations, that was approved back in 15. If you look on page 4, there are conditions that must be met, and an approved application may include other conditions as follows, and some of those abatements are in there, and a lot of that was, Hillary, to your point, it was very much at the discretion of the director, yeah. And this sounds a lot more structured. Okay. Is it time to move to May and what just happened at town meeting and how we want to move forward from here and start going over rates?
Let's do it.
Yes? Do you feel like we missed anything, Pat? Is there something we should review more of? You're looking at me. No?
No.
I misread you.
Yeah, no, I think,
Cover everything. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so, we had in front of us, and probably the only, person we don't have here tonight is, the agency that did the work for us on our process as far as what our options are moving forward, which of course was a very long discussion. And we don't have Dan here tonight. Where we left it, and obviously we have a different board by one member now, where we left it was we were going to take one of the recommendations, which was to try to mitigate the increases we will need to assess to the sewer ratepayers by using a portion of water retained earnings in a combined water sewer enterprise in order to offset this extremely large bill that we had seen. However, we were also looking at increasing rates as well. You all have that document, I think, in front of you, yes?
Yep.
And that's from Joe.
yeah, tell us about this, Joe.
Sure. That basically mirrors what's in the Abrams Group report. I went through the numbers extensively, and I think that's the best place we can go at this time. Back to the earlier question, we could really limit how much we raise the water rate, but I think 10% is conservative. Regarding the sewer rates, I'm gonna stick to the report and suggest that they go up roughly 50%, but at the same time drop the II charge. What this basically does is it means more of the actual sewer utility is being paid by the ratepayers, and the II charge goes to something more of what it's intended to do. In addition to this rate structure also includes capital improvements funded by borrowing, and that'll have to be debated at the fall town meeting.
How'd you come about this document? Who's your source of information? Yeah.
This one?
Yeah.
Most of it comes from the Abrams Group report, but a lot of it comes from internal documents that we sent to the board over the last couple months.
Did anybody have questions, and I know the audience doesn't necessarily have it in front of them, but did anybody have questions about the Abrams Group report and the 6 options? I know we all got one chance to review it. We can certainly revisit it at the public hearing as well. We spent quite a bit of time on it, Joe, so I think in the absence of anybody wanting to say, no, let's really go back and take a fresh look at everything that we've got.
6 became 2.
6 became 2,
Right.
yeah.
It was more like 10. 10 became 6. 6 became 2.
I don't know if I saw 10, but okay.
You talking about options?
Yeah. Well, we had
We had a lot of internal discussions before.
in advance
Yeah.
Okay.
before you saw the 6.
Okay.
Well, in a public hearing, people may want an explanation of everything that's there also.
Yeah,
Right,
the
as
copy I'm
part of
looking
the-
at only has the 2 options listed.
Yeah, so
too.
as part of the timeline, we could certainly include, here there were 10 options, we went with 6, and we can have those documents available.
Maybe speak to this. Originally, I asked the original report to be produced in draft.
Yep.
And you got a draft report. After the draft report, we produced the 6 options. Most of the 6 options were very, very similar. They
Right.
boiled down to procedural changes on how to
Mhm.
combine the two to be able to recover the deficit. Then eventually the board got to the decision, okay, we know we have to do capital work. Do we want to try and put that in the rate so the rates are higher? Or do we want to pay for the capital work with borrowing? And we collectively
Yeah.
agreed borrowing. So most of the final report, which came after the board reviewed the 6 options and the 2 options, is the decision to start to borrow to make capital improvements
Is this the
and
final?
recommends a
Is
formal
this the
rate.
final report? The final report has the 6 options in it.
Does it?
Yep,
Do we have that?
Yeah, we
it's the
do.
March 22nd,
22nd.
2019.
I think it might still be in your folders, if you
Yeah,
have it.
I cleaned my folder.
Clean your folders.
Yeah, it's all in my,
Okay.
it's all in my kitchen table.
All right, so let's make sure everybody gets that.
They're all
They're
there's
all the
basically
same.
2 options.
Yeah.
One
Can you
is
read 'em
like
out?
do it as of July 31st, as of June 30th versus July 31st. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Would someone mind reading the 2 options that are before us?
Well, they were broken in half by date, which is what
Yeah,
Hillary just said.
yeah,
And then they were
so-
broken out by, do you want to use the retained earnings or don't you? We had those options.
Yeah.
And then we had the different structures on the rates. So I will resend that to everybody here, so you all have it, but.
Have we received any clarification from DOR yet?
We
I know the
got,
last time we had met,
No.
and prior to having taken this to town meeting, we never received, I guess, permission or instruction from DOR on how to handle the process. I'm wondering if that's been clarified by DOR.
it has not.
And if you
As
tell
a
me we're
matter-
in compliance, and I'm gonna be very upset.
Uh,
The last I heard, they had,
They were.
they basically asked for a bunch of information, which included budgets, this report, bills from DCR for the last couple of years. They basically wanted to see all the data we had,
Yep.
and they were gonna make a recommendation on how we proceed. And that
Actually-
was about a week ago.
So a recommendation of how we proceed is in, they're okay with us doing this, it's just a technicality on how to do it.
Yeah.
So how many
So-
other communities in the Commonwealth have done this?
That we're aware of, a few other, but.
A
we
few
weren't-
is in like 2 or a few is in like 30? Like what does that mean?
Well, Mark Abrams didn't necessarily know any more than the ones he had worked
Right,
with. I want to say
exactly.
he
Hard for
brought
us to
up
know.
Braintree specific, was it
Yeah,
Braintree?
so
Braintree was
Braintree,
one.
Winchester, I have it written down somewhere,
Yeah.
and then there was at least one or two others that he knew of. So I just wanna be really specific about how we did not do like a blanket, research on what all the Commonwealth is doing. We just are only speaking to experience that we have had, or that he has had with other communities.
And what was available to us.
Right.
So the email from DOR, which didn't go to me, but Pat, you sent it out, I think, to the work group,
Yes.
was on May 30th from Mary Jane, and it was, "Good morning, exclamation point. We are preparing a work plan for Rutland, re the water and sewer enterprise funds to finalize our plan. Need a copy of the FY19 DCR bills. The date of payment, please include the bill that is currently unpaid due to the underfunded budget. Thanks." That was our last, that I know of. Anything from them.
Is the director, that's who signed it?
Director of Accounts. Division of Local Services.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Not really, I mean, we didn't, that's not clarification, that's more just requesting documents, but I'm just,
I got the sense that they were trying to help us work through this process with the
Sure.
work plan. That was my sense, but you're right. It was okay, here we go, we're ready, send us some documents and we're gonna see you through this. Yeah, but that is the last thing we have from
Just
them.
to clarify, who's the point of contact for them right now is the accountant,
Right.
the town's accountant.
Is there anyone, you know what, I said I was gonna resend you all the Abrams Group report. Is there anyone who wants to revisit at the public hearing all 6 options, other than the high level, here's what we started with and here's where we've gotten to? But you weren't there for that part, so I mean, it's fine either way. We do lose people after a while. I mean, look at Scott's face. I'm just kidding.
Lost Clea entirely.
I know, we lost Clee.
But you may be asked that at the hearing anyway. You may be asked by someone.
True. Yeah,
Review these.
absolutely.
yeah, I think we should, because, I mean, this was a hot button issue at town meeting, but I think the fact that we didn't receive any clarification prior to bringing this to town meeting, I think we definitely should talk about the other options that were at least presented to us.
Wait, what did you say? We didn't, what?
We didn't receive clarification from DOR prior to bringing this to town meeting.
Do you think that's a fair statement?
Considering we had emails after town meeting from DOR clearly expressing that this hasn't been resolved, I think that's a fair statement.
So, the Friday before town meeting, after all of this review had happened, we received a call that different I don't want to say it's a faction within DOR. There were differences of opinion within DOR for something that
Again,
Our
DOR is not a
understanding
rebel
was-
alliance. It's a state agency.
I think they have
We're not
differences
dealing
of
with different
opinion.
factions in DOR.
Well, they
Well, there was
clearly
two
had
different opinions
differences of
from the same
opinion.
department.
Yeah.
And that really is where the issue kind of came in.
So
was
we
that-
received an official opinion from part of DOR saying we could do something, and then another part of DOR said we couldn't. What are we talking about here when we say factions of DOR?
Mark Abrams received what he believed to be approval. Is that a fair statement?
I don't know if approval would be the right.
Okay.
That's a little bit of a strong term. He
Right.
consulted with them.
Compliance, that would be the right word, right?
Mm.
We would be in
No.
compliance? No?
No.
Okay.
We'll
No,
think-
we're not in
Because that would assume
compliance.
that there's
Let's
a-
not talk
Okay,
about
no,
compliance.
no,
There's
I just, that was a
compliance,
joke.
okay? Let's
That
not
was,
muddy the waters.
all right.
I think we need to
Um,
think about the right word, but there's no question that Mark Abrams felt he was confident that he had received adequate guidance from DOR that this was an acceptable way to move forward. And on Friday before a town meeting, there was a difference of opinion. And I see what you're saying, but I don't know that there's much other way to.
The only difference of opinion was where we put the money in the interim. It had to go into free cash. It wasn't like they said we couldn't dissolve the accounts.
It was just the method for
Yeah,
doing it.
Right.
Yeah, it was
They were
just the
It's a
method.
procedural matter.
They were concerned that we were not going to cycle the money through free cash and certification of free cash.
Right, that was,
Right.
and they certified, this is the agency that does that, so I can see their concern, but I don't think they said we couldn't do it, it was just more procedural.
Okay.
We did have town council review all these suggestions as well.
We did, and then the Saturday day of town meeting, I think those conversations were going on from all day, yeah, morning until right before the meeting to ensure that we really were able to do what we were doing. Because as you can imagine, it raised a lot of red flags. What just happened? We thought we were okay. We had a lot of people looking at this and a lot of people reviewing it, and yeah.
So somewhere the town has an email prior to us taking this to town meeting saying that this was okay to do from DOR.
We have the Abrams Group documents. And this is a conversation we should all have, which is a conversation that probably can happen anytime. It's a fair statement to say that DOR should be dealing directly with a community. And in many cases doesn't, because we don't have the expertise to do it. So it deals with, in our case, our accountant, who's not internal, but has been with us for a very long time, technically a contractor, or for this particular scenario, the Abrams Group. That was our middleman contact. And it's who we hired, yeah. And known for having a very good relationship with DOR, correct? In order to see towns through this. So I think at the time, it was felt that relationship and that chain was good enough. And I know you don't
Why
like
would
me
you think it
saying,
wasn't?
you don't
Town
like
of
me
Rutland,
saying hindsight
good
20
enough.
What, no.
That should be a new tagline coming in, Sheila. Put that on the signs
Yeah.
coming in out of town.
Well, you don't like me saying hindsight 2020, but sure. Is it fair to say that I personally would never go into any type of situation like this again without getting something from the DOR, letterhead signed by Mary Jane herself? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know that that's how they typically operate, but would this town demand it after going through what we just went through? Yeah, I would. Harry.
Getting verification, I would have thought that the Abrams Group would have given you something saying that in my conversation with the DOR, they have specified this. Did we ever get that from the Abrams Group?
We do.
So, to me, I guess, is that a validation where we have a government entity dealing with somebody that says, go ahead and do it? I guess.
Look,
don't
I think
know.
we need to make clear, the Abrams Group has a great reputation and they do excellent work throughout this entire region and community. I think that's not the issue here. I guess to your point, Sheila, I think it would benefit everybody at the hearing if we heard the different options that had been presented.
Yep.
Just
We'll
so
go through.
everyone's
Yep.
comfortable moving this through.
In a
Absolutely.
separate document that could be handed out.
Yep.
So can I just get some clarity on, would you like Mark Abrams to come and present it like in a PowerPoint type of format? Or would you rather like a summary one pager that could be passed around? Do
I
you
mean, I
want
think that
Mark?
would suffice, at least have it out so we're not going off of the recollection or.
I think nobody likes PowerPoints.
Yeah.
We had that at town meeting, we heard that, well, it didn't go over that well for anybody. You know, we already had one consulting group warn us about impartiality, so I think we just need to avoid
Really?
the PowerPoint altogether.
I'm
All
torn,
right.
Hillary. It's such a big, serious topic, and yet we have so much to cover that night. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
When is this?
It's supposed to be in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the sooner we find out, the better, so we can try to, now, would you want Mark to be there to answer questions?
Right, that was part of your, and I don't.
I know you avoided that, didn't you? I just don't want to put you in a position where, you know, it's a last minute decision and he's not available or prepared or anything like that.
Any educated people in the room have an opinion? Do you want to see the Abrams group
I
here?
don't think the Abrams group needs to, I mean, it's
No?
not their decision. I just feel bad whenever we make somebody that's hired to do something defend
Right.
a decision the town has to make.
Well, I personally feel that, I guess I like the details, so we relied on, his last name Abrams?
Abrams, yeah.
Mr. Abrams to provide us a document that says it's okay to go. So I guess for me, I'd like to know where that came from. I'd like him to explain to himself why he advised us to do this, when apparently he should have known that other email that came through saying now we have an issue with the procedure, because he advised us on this. Am I reading this correctly?
We were proceeding, he was proceeding, and you know, to Mitch's point, highly respected, good in the field, great relationship with DOR. We were all proceeding, that everything was acceptable to do and that we were all moving forward. It, honest to God, wasn't until the day before a town meeting that there started to be questions. And at that point, the day ended, DOR closed for the day, and we were left in limbo at that point on Friday night, which is why we had a lot of people scrambling on Saturday, trying to figure out what had happened.
And we were still in
Was
limbo.
Mr. Abrams aware of that Friday email?
Yeah.
Yes, he was
Yeah.
made
Oh, yeah.
aware of that email on Saturday morning. I spoke with him
Oh, on
multiple
Saturday
times on
morning?
Saturday.
Oh, yeah,
He
I
reached
know.
out to DOR probably multiple times on Saturday.
I think,
Uh,
he-
and
I
attempts
think
to get
he's
a-
just as upset about this as everyone else is.
Yeah, but I guess I'm saying, did he feel it was an issue enough to recommend to the town when we're not, because apparently he just said, my feeling is listening to this is, okay, we're just gonna go through it the way we did, even though we had this email. I guess that's where, it might help to hear from Mr. Abrams, I don't know, you know?
No, that was a good question. I think where we ended up, and we don't have KP here, but after the day had happened and all the discussions going back and forth, we knew that at least the core of what we were doing at town meeting was still appropriate. That's why we proceeded. There are still to this day questions about how to take us through this process after that town meeting vote, but yeah, I think is that a fair statement?
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely,
think they
yeah.
ever said we couldn't do it.
Right.
It was more just where you put the money in the interim.
Procedural
Right.
Yeah.
concerns.
And the language of, and the wording of the article, which was that was why there was a little bit of a scramble to make sure that the wording was was correct. And when we had sort of, you know, some conflicting information and not a lot of time or accessibility to DOR during that day to resolve it, Mark was there to help us and to guide us through that as well. So, you know,
Could somebody explain the Abrams group to everybody in here? What are they, how are they connected here? I guess, I don't even know.
yeah, so the Abrams group is Mark Abrams and a few other staff members of his, and he's an expert in municipal financing and rate studies and things like that. So, you know, this was somewhat of a complex situation. It wasn't quite as simple as, you know, a linear calculation on we need this much money and we have this many users, so it's just this is what the rate is. It was a little bit more complex. So Weston and Sampson hired him as a sub-consultant expert to do this work, and we are. You know, we do have experience with this process, but we are not municipal finance experts. We're civil engineers. We went to civil engineering school. We design pipes. And so while we do have a peripheral understanding of the concepts about how this works, we don't make recommendations on how you finance projects and fund projects and how you set rates and things like that. That's really much more of a municipal finance thing, which is why we brought him in as an expert.
I mean, I'm not questioning his ability or anything, I'm just questioning where he fits into the system in terms of, if this is his expertise, then we relied on his expertise to do this,
Yeah,
okay?
he's a CPA.
Huh?
He's a CPA.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
that answers a lot for
Sorry.
me too.
Okay.
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 Page 2 of the report, he speaks about his conversations with DOR extensively. Second page of the report.
I forwarded all of you the draft version of the report, which is the longest version, so you'll all have that to review in between these 2 weeks.
The, if I could just comment on the 6 options just quick. The 6 options don't speak to the premise or what the intent is to accomplish. In other words, all six options assume that you're going to combine the 2 funds. Some way, it's just most of them are mostly procedural.
Right.
I mean, we can review it if you want.
No, so let's have a conversation, and maybe Scott, this is one of the reasons you're staying. Let's have a conversation about how we can frame this so that our water users, our water-only users, are confident that their monies are not being simply spent and not replenished. Now, that's reflected in the 5-year plan, but it's sort of an indirect reflection, if that makes sense, right? There's no specific line that says, well, in consideration of the money that, in my head, we're sort of borrowing from those water users. And this was a conversation that I had with Dan Haynes, our accountant as well. In combining our water sewer enterprise accounts, he's going to have a lot more to do as far as ensuring that it's very clear that all the billings, things that come in when we talk about that enterprise fund, that you see it. You see it from an accounting perspective, that everything is itemized and line item. And I think we briefly, I don't know if it was in one of our regular BOS meetings, had conversations about how important it's going to be. No, Joe, I think you brought it up, to release a document for transparency's sake of the money's taken in, money's expended, where everything is going for our water users, ratepayers, and our sewer users, ratepayers. And that this combination of the fund, while it's giving us access to monies that we need right now because A through Z, we're still operating our 2 separate entities, and we are making that effort to ensure that the water users aren't left in a situation where those monies that were accrued over X number of years have now been lost to them. At least that's where I ended up with it.
If you spend it, it's growing, is you putting it back?
Yeah,
I
we're
mean,
putting it back.
if you spend the $750,
I want to make sure we're putting it back. So
But
we
it's
should
gonna
have
be in
that.
the combined account, though, we're putting it
but
back.
it's in a
But
combined
it's gonna be
account, so
delineated somewhere
Yeah.
on a document,
Sort
so
of an-
people can see
Yeah.
that it is coming back.
It'll be a line item in a budget,
It's gonna be a process to get back,
right?
they'll be able to see that it is coming back. Correct?
But if your new rate doesn't even cover what you're using now, it's not going back anytime soon.
No, the new rate, when you look at the,
50%. Or an increase in the sewer rate, is that gonna cover the whole bill for the sewer part?
not in the first year.
So where's
Not
the money for 4th quarter come from? You got 4th
Wait.
quarter bill coming that you asked for an extension
Okay,
for.
so we paid 3/4. We paid roughly $590,000, I think, and change. by-
593.
4th quarter you asked for an
Okay.
extension for.
And the 4th quarter, we asked for
Which
an
we haven't gotten the bill
extension.
yet.
Right, you don't have, but you have an
Right.
idea.
Yep.
And
Where's that money?
the intent was that would be, we would pay that bill with retained earnings, and then raise rates effective July 1.
So retained earnings from the water again? Or
That's,
now that it's combined, you're gonna take it again?
No,
no,
just
that would be
one.
the
Only
time
once.
we'll take it, just
Okay.
the one time we'll take that money.
Okay.
So, I mean, the Abrams report indicates that the sewer revenues won't cover sewer expenditures until FY '22. Now, that's not assuming a rate increase, correct? That's just if we continue, or is water then going to subsidize sewer for the next 3 fiscal years?
No, that is not the intent at all. Where did you read that in the report?
I just pulled it out. I don't remember what exact page it was on.
stuff into the rate, but the ability to recover retained earnings in both operating accounts.
No, you know what, I'm looking what I just sent you, and I think I sent you the short version.
We should have,
It's broken. My laptop is broken. All right, but this is a fair question. We want to ensure that that
On page
is
10, Joe.
something that gets answered.
Three
which
quarters
is-
of the way
It's one of
down.
those, you're going, okay,
Yeah.
how long is it gonna extend? before
Projections
I
show.
know it's not gonna get paid back tomorrow.
Let me just read
But-
it, hold on.
No, in order to ensure, you know, one of the things we kept talking about was how do you mitigate these increases for a ratepayer who's gonna see such an astronomical increase, right? And so one of the things we could have done is just said, oh, well, we gotta pay the bill, and hit them with that, whether it was a supplemental bill or a supplemental bill and a very extreme increase. This is going to allow us to kind of amortize that out a little bit. It still doesn't get back to paying back our water ratepayers for the retained earnings that they had been holding on to. And you know, you can have copies of this too, where did I go with it? But just as an example, and I think you were here when I was saying it, this was our process. So for example, in 14, our water retained earnings were 342, and they were increasing every year, 531, 727, 921, actually down a little bit, 918 in 2018, in anticipation of a large capital project, and that money was gonna get used.
What was the project? Isn't gonna happen now.
No, it will happen, but it'll be a borrowed project.
Is that
So
the
we're-
CIPC project that you talked about earlier?
No,
That was
this
approved.
is separated. The CIPC project we referenced was sewer back in 17, yeah. It was actually I&I work, right? Yeah.
So now you're gonna take a loan for something you had the money for and pay interest on.
You didn't have the money though.
We
Well, you
had,
had part of it.
we had a
Not yet,
portion.
just
Yeah,
a little
Yeah, we had a
bit.
What's the project?
I think it's I don't remember.
Calerio?
Calerio development.
Yeah, an
And
older
most of it's
section
bad
of water
water main.
pipe.
There's been breaks there, loss
Yeah.
of service.
So I guess to my original question, Joe, I think you're
have to-
caught up.
I don't have a good answer for you. I wanna think about that one for a minute, because that's not the intent.
So does this takes into account the rate raises though, correct?
I don't have an answer
Yes.
off the top of my head.
She's nodding yes.
Well,
so-
I mean, the projection of, you know, of what, I mean, if you're looking at option one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it does take in effect the rate increases. I mean, that's kind of the,
And so it says here that water revenues will subsidize sewer operations until FY '22. Is that the route that we're going?
I don't have a good answer for you. Could you just give me a minute? We followed the rate recommended in the report, but we were never intending to use water revenues to fund sewer
No.
operations. That's not the intent.
No,
So
I need you
just-
to read that too.
Give me a minute. Please.
No problem.
Because I went through the budget, I went through the rates as recommended in the report, and I wrote the budget for sewer operations for this year, and I can tell you that we can fund this year's sewer operations based on that rate recommendation. I have some concerns if we were to get excessive II again, that we, you know, we may not be able to cover it all, but by no means, no, that was not my intent. So let me review that with the consultant, and I'll try and answer your question the best I can.
Thank you.
So, back to the issue of repaying water. Let's assume we're gonna clarify that in the right way, which is no. The answer is no, right? We're not going to use water revenues to offset sewer.
We don't know that that's the answer though.
Well, we haven't approved rates yet. We're gonna have to fix it to make sure we don't.
Correct.
The answer is simply no.
Assume it pays for itself.
Assuming it's paying for itself,
How do you
let's,
to repay water, that's what she's,
Right,
she's trying to
right.
segue where they talk about.
But I mean,
it.
like, the rate might actually have to be higher than your calculation, which is kind of what I'm getting at. So we don't even know what rate we're talking about yet, but we want to, that's fine. Okay, so let's move on to talking about how we're going to repay water, whether it's
Yeah.
now or 2037 or whenever we're going to
I
stop.
hope not 2037, yeah.
Okay.
At best in the memo, my memo says it's a draft for recommendation for discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is there, and maybe that would be a question for Mark, although I'm not sure. I think we just want to make sure internally, maybe it's a question for Dan. I think we want to make sure internally that we are managing this such that when an annual report comes out for the water ratepayers, the sewer ratepayers, that they see that that money is essentially being repaid, that it was borrowed by the sewer users and that it is getting paid back in, so that the water ratepayers have access to what was originally their retained earnings. Is that fair? And that's a back end accounting process, but it needs to be made abundantly clear to our ratepayers.
Hmm.
Everybody's just looking at me blankly. Yeah? Okay. Okay. What have we not covered that people have still very big questions about?
The cause.
Okay. The cause.
Of the predicament we're in, why we've run in a deficit for the last 3 years. I mean, we've heard a lot of things. I mean, is it just a combination of all those things, whether it's...
It's a combination of the rate was too low
Mhm.
and the II was too high. And I've said it a few times, it was a perfect storm.
How often can you adjust the rate?
It's up to.
Quarterly?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
So shouldn't it be adjusted according to billing? If it has to change every quarter, it changes every quarter, instead of letting it get behind.
I mean, yeah, there's no question, that's one of those, my God, why didn't we just
That's just,
jack up the
that's
rate
just best
faster?
practice.
Why didn't we, yeah, you know what else was killing us too, Scott, is, I'm looking at, say, free cash, and you don't wanna supplement with free cash, but say in the years you were doing fine and weather was amenable, whatever, we were at, in sewer, 360, 306, 415 in 2016. We could have, no pun intended, weathered this better had we not taken out the free cash to use it for a capital project. But that was our process. It was just the way we did things. So then, back in 17, we're down to, and we used some of it, again, for the big bill, which gets back to we should have raised rates faster. We did raise them in 18, but it wasn't fast enough. So we could have weathered it better. But we're back to sort of, well, when do you spend the money and where? Because you were asking the question about the water project. We are looking now at a process and a large-scale plan. We're moving forward. We're always going to be borrowing for our infrastructure projects. We will not be retaining earnings for infrastructure.
Joe, so this option / proposal, is that closely resembles option 3 of the Abrams?
You mean just the sewer? So just for
There's only
the,
two options.
There's only two. The option,
I think it's option one.
It's option one.
Option one, capital funded by borrowing.
Are you looking at the
I'm
March
looking at the water
22nd?
water and sewer rate study options for rate changes fiscal 19 and 2024. The attachment that was on that email.
yeah, the one he ended up taking was a 50% increase, 1032 per CCF, reduction in the number 2 charge, which was the I&I charge, resulting in an estimated increase to homeowners of $237.63 a year for both water and sewer increases. That total, that number, 237 per year, is for the 10% water as well. And, so Mitch, I think the question you were still asking was how do we get here? But we do still have time and room to look again at our sewer rates and where we want to head, and whether you like that 5-year plan proposed or we tweak it more.
You want to table all this, you're saying?
Or Joe, no, we can't table it. We need to continue to move forward. But what we can do, if the board wanted to, based on maybe hearing more information or getting our minds wrapped around it more, is to revisit some of the things that we thought we had settled. And that's okay. There's a lot going on, and town meeting has now come and gone, so.
No, we gotta move forward. I mean, does it cost us anything to ask Abrams to come to the meeting? Does it cost the town anything?
Yeah, well, of course it is.
It always does.
Then,
I suppose we could play the you owe us this card.
well, it seems to be dominating the conversation tonight when we really
I
wanna
guess.
move on to the rates, But if that's what
Yeah, and
we can
the intent is
predict-
not to have this dominate the conversation. It's more, if we're adjusting the rates and we're going to impose a huge increase on taxpayers in a tax increase, ratepayers, I think we need to be clear that we need to be in a position, we need to be comfortable that this isn't going to happen again 3 or 4 years down the road.
Do you feel, Joe, like that your 5-year plan addresses that adequately? That we've essentially, Mitch, so to your point, I think that's why, and I think it was probably Margaret, would you agree, Hillary, who said we shouldn't just be raising the rates willy-nilly. We need to have a plan here. It's why we commissioned the water sewer study. So I think, yeah, we did the study in order to have this information, in order to say, yes, here's what we're gonna have to do for 5 years. And of course, here's Joe saying to us, yes, we have this 5-year plan, and yet it's still not gonna be set in stone. We might, God forbid, have to raise them even more.
Well, a 5-year plan is gonna have to be reviewed every year.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should be reviewing rates all the time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep.
2 5-year plans in place. So just to clarify, one you talked about was the rate increases that the report has recommended we do over the next 5 years. I don't know necessarily if we need to go down that road, similar to what you just said. We need to review it annually.
Okay.
And well in advance, if at all possible.
Yep.
The other 5-year plan, I believe you referenced, is the 5-year capital plan,
Right.
which is for water and sewer improvements. And that's intended to do water improvements in the neighborhood that we talked about that was promised over a 5-year span, and similar improvements to sewer, more targeted II work. They're not huge amounts of money. They're $200,000 and $400,000 respectively annually.
Okay.
And what that does is it gets you a commitment to do work every single year. It's not gonna knock it all out, but it'll get it done over time. And then I think you're gonna have to review your 5-year plan 4.5 years from now on the capital side, figure out where you're headed next. The other thing that the report speaks to extensively is rebuilding the what I call contingency, what you call retained earnings, that has been used in the past to do capital improvements, but to have that on hand at the end of 5 years in case of an emergency.
Right.
I hope that answers your question.
I think so. It was really more Mitch's question too. So Mitch, I think it also addresses something that, do we want to revisit this more? You're hearing from Joe, you're hearing from Weston and Sampson that those numbers relative to capital are conservative. And you were asking about, well, are we in compliance? And the wink, nudge, nudge. We could spend double that, triple.
Easily.
Hillary,
I think you should spend $1 million a year.
What are we spending now?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Well, not
Not nothing. Not nothing.
but
2 years ago, you funded a $350,000 project, which just wrapped up. Construction just wrapped up, in the past 6 months? A little while ago.
Retest will be next week to look at all the repairs, but that was only half of what we identified in years 1 and 2 for cost-effective repairs, the repairs that Hillary spoke of earlier that it should be fixed, the high priority ones.
So we identified, say 100% of the infiltration that we identified, some of that was cost effective, and we only targeted 50% of that. So you really kind of narrowed the margin on what you are removing as far as infiltration. So no, I don't think that you're doing enough you're not doing enough to keep ahead of it, obviously, because of the excess flow that you're sending to DCR.
right. And if we assume that at least some of that is ours, much as it would be lovely to assume that all of it is DCR's fault, I think then the next question is, we're gonna hit our ratepayers, we're gonna have to hit them hard this year to catch up, to be able to pay these bills. Do we then take a breather that we might not have, but revisit our capital and get it to be more aggressive based on what Weston Sampson is recommending? Or do we stick with what we've been doing, which you had a term for it, didn't you? There was a term for the level of work we were doing.
She just said nothing.
Minimum
No.
effective compliance. No,
You used a term a few weeks ago. I don't know what it was. It was meant to be, I guess it was maybe a sewer version of the Band-Aid approach,
Yeah,
right?
I
You
mean,
fix
that's
what's in
basically-
front of you, you triage. And
Yeah, the find it, fix it.
Find it, fix it. Find it, fix it.
The other
Find it,
problem
fix
with-
it. I think that was Joe's term.
Oh,
The
thank
other
you.
problem with that is, if you put off capital improvements, when you do get around to doing them, your costs are that much more.
Yeah. So as far as a timeline goes, obviously this is coming up very fast. We need to set our new rates. We need to talk about the moratorium in 2 weeks. to Joe's point about that second 5-year plan, the capital plan, that's a prep for fall town meeting. So we've got until October to have a conversation about this and talk about whether we want to be more aggressive with it. And if that would be maybe the time to say, well, Weston Sampson's really recommending this, here's what we are, and where do we want to be?
And a significant amount of the actual money that goes into the program goes towards the contractors that are performing the repairs and the investigations. It's not all engineering fees.
Yeah.
It's more of the actual physical repair work and investigation work that are performed by contractors.
That's good to hear. Thank God.
No, just,
Well,
no,
I
that
guess
just,
I think if I could just expand on that a little bit, so, you know, you hire Weston and Sampson to do an investigation study. We hire a subcontractor to actually do the work, so, you know, if there's a $100,000 project, it's not $100,000 worth of engineering fees.
Oh, right.
Right, so
Right.
that there's investigation and data collection that goes along with that. And then, because of mass public bidding laws, you contract directly with a contractor, actually do the work.
Mhm.
And we guide you through that process, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Moving on.
We've hit all the big stuff tonight. We have a list of questions, I think, to move forward with. We can continue to add to those. You can send them in to Mike if you have more, in preparation for 2 weeks from now. The goal 2 weeks from now is to set rates. So if anybody feels that they need a meeting in between of the Board of Public Works in order to have a deeper discussion, maybe with Joe, we should set a special meeting for that prior to the public hearing. But we covered a lot tonight, unless maybe our giant audience has questions. You could, yes. I can't think of anything else to talk about, though. Anybody?
Do we have the moratorium that was on the agenda?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, we don't have to. It's on the agenda.
It is on the agenda. Well, it was on the agenda just to note that we have to cover it in the public hearing.
Okay.
It's coming up for expiration.
Yep.
We had specific goals, some of which we've achieved and some of which we haven't.
Mhm.
And we'll have to come to some decision as to whether, they're talking, Weston and Sampson's, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe their opinion about the moratorium is that it needs to continue in order for us to get ourselves sort of in hand.
Do you guys have an opinion yet on the moratorium, or is that still very much a?
Sorry. I wasn't paying attention, I'm sorry.
I didn't want to speak for Weston and Sampson. I wanted to say that that Weston and Sampson's recommendation relative to the moratorium was that we had made some progress in our goals of answering questions, but that they weren't all there yet.
As far as whether or not to extend it?
Yeah.
I would have to go back and look at the wording of the moratorium,
Okay.
Officially, but my understanding was that there was going to be an investigation of sort of what the problem was and what we were gonna do to fix it before there was any change in the moratorium. So, in other words, not much has actually physically changed from last year, or in September. Was it September when the moratorium was? May, June?
June. It was
Sorry.
June. It's
Yeah.
been a year.
So it's
Yeah.
been a year, so,
Yep.
I don't think that anything has physically changed in the past year.
Plain English, we haven't
nothing's
done
been done.
anything. In plain English, we haven't made any systemic improvements that would provide
That would
capacity for
change.
either of those two, either water or sewer, from where you were a year ago.
Systemic improvements such as,
Um,
certainly on the water side, and this was not something we could have done in a year, but on the water side, one of the discussions, well, actually, we've done some things, at least in crossing them off. One of the discussions with water capacity particularly was whether or not, for example, the well at the Heights was viable. We now know that it's not. We began that conversation with Quabbin and have some preliminary documents from Quabbin, but we obviously have not signed a contract tying in with Quabbin for emergency access. Highly expensive. It's something we need to continue to talk about. At least that was on the water side. I know those were a couple of things. So I just, what are the, yeah. We're gonna have a conversation about a process to know what our next steps are.
Will you
You
have
ca-
a
you can't-
recommendation, come the moratorium meeting? Will Weston and Sampson have something to recommend to the town?
I recommend that you do an II project to remove flow. I mean, that's basically what I think you need to do to open up capacity, is you have to remove flow.
So that's appropriating
I-
money in the fall through borrowing. Project could probably happen in the spring. Ugh. Okay. Yeah.
A new project has not been done since the moratorium.
So it's not like the recommendation's gonna change, I mean,
No,
because we
if
haven't done
anything,
anything.
We've gone over our allotment because of all the rain.
So time to adjourn, Leah. Come on in.
I wasn't sure how long it
Near the end.
was. Long.
Near the end, but
So your recommendation at this point, at least for conversation purposes, would be to continue the moratorium.
Yes, if that's the way, if the wording was that we have to resolve the problem before we can lift the moratorium, we have not resolved the problem.
I have not. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
I didn't have, yeah,
Okay. Oh. Somebody's question. Okay.
I'd like to see it spelled out. What are you asking of us, you know?
So we have developed a recommendation for an annual program that extends out as far as you wanna take it. You know, we could give you tomorrow, we could tell you what we think you need to do. I think we probably had talked about that. I'm not sure about the timing with you and, when you were going through your budget process. When did you start?
Just after Christmas.
Yeah, so we probably would have talked about it with Gary before the end of the year.
Yeah.
About which project we think you should do next, and it just didn't make it onto didn't make the cut.
Didn't make the cut.
So to answer your question, if you wanted to do a project tomorrow, we're ready to go. We've got recommendations on doing projects.
so that's been conveyed to us prior? Yeah,
At least to Gary. You know, that would be the, you know.
so
Yeah,
it never
well,
made,
in
it never made
general-
it to the board, or?
The last big project consideration we took on was the one
Was
that
the
Hillary keeps
2017,
referencing, the
yeah.
17, where we pulled the money from retained earnings, took it to town meeting, said we need to do this, $325,000, yeah, yep.
So the rest of those recommendations, do we have those as a board, or have those not been conveyed to us?
They're in a report that I believe that
Well,
Sure,
whether it's been made accessible to you personally, I'm not sure, but, the town has a report that says that we think you need to do X, Y, and Z.
We didn't deal with them on this level, that systemically. We would be taking recommendations
It would have come from.
Joe needs to dig that out.
from, yeah,
we worked
we worked with
with
Gary.
Gary, like extensively.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that
it
was
was
my
very
question.
detailed,
That was my
yes.
question.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The other thing is, not long after I took over, and I gotta look at the water and sewer rate situation, I basically asked Western Sampson's to focus on just that, because we simply couldn't pay bills.
So we need to find that and take a look at it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think we should.
Yeah, and we've presented it at town meeting, the overall plan.
Mhm.
You know, we did a flow metering project, and we
Mhm.
identified which sub-areas should be done when,
It was a good PowerPoint.
and came up, thank you. It was a good PowerPoint.
There's no
People
such
liked
thing, Sheila.
PowerPoints back then.
I know. Back in the day.
And, you know, we had, you know, presented this overall five-year and beyond plan about what we thought should be done.
Yeah.
And we've done, you know, a little bit here and there, I would say. You know, we did an investigation every year, but then not a rehab project every year. So it hasn't exactly conformed to what we suggested,
And some
but
of that's the funding.
it is.
it's the
Well,
retained
I think
earnings.
it's all of it is
Yeah,
the
a lot of
funding. I
it's
mean,
the
if you
funding
had the
approach.
funding, we would be doing the project.
Right.
So,
Sure.
there were times that there just wasn't money and it didn't make it onto the finance committee or budget or whatever, you know?
It just wasn't recommended. It was
But-
something, it could wait.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The moratorium was passed, the most recent one was passed a year ago, roughly?
June, yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So between last June and this June, though, there's been no changes in the system that would provide capacity for either water or sewer.
No, there've been no changes to capacity. I would argue that, particularly with you coming on, we've made significant progress in planning. And I don't take that lightly. I don't. Harry?
through the chair, Mr. Buckley, when you get that West Sampson report, could you make sure CIPC gets a copy of that?
Which one?
The one,
Capital.
the projected, the
The capital.
capital expenditure program going out?
I think I sent it already, but I'll send the most recent one. I sent the first one out, yes,
Did you?
along with the report, yeah.
The full one?
Yep.
The full? Okay, I'll take a look, I didn't see it.
Okay.
Okay.
So yet again, does this precipitate a question of the Board of Water, Sewer, or whatever the heck we're called, Board of Public Works, is that our name? Board of Public Works having a conversation, maybe after the public hearing in 2 weeks, about revisiting Weston and Sampson's recommendation and whether we wanna get more aggressive?
The answer is yes, and I also like Mr. Blair's discussion about a partnership with,
Sewer bank, right?
I agree with
Well,
Jeff on that.
Yes,
I
so
We're
think
gonna
Okay.
get some
Yeah.
recommendations and some
Yeah.
comparisons.
Yep.
that was
They're gonna
very,
bring that for us.
that was productive, I thought.
yeah, absolutely agree.
So is it fair to say, and we won't decide anything tonight, but those are two things that could be goals for fall town meeting? I don't know if that's something we could get ready in time. Fall town
Possibly.
meeting, sewer bank?
Oh, yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I guess I can pull it together by then.
With the PowerPoint.
I don't know whether you guys, with the PowerPoint.
I'm very open to that.
I suppose you could switch to Google Slides, and then you could.
I would love to be able to learn how to do all those things.
Just quick to the credit of our staff, we did complete leak detection this spring. We had a contractor come in and go through the water system. We found a couple small leaks that had been dealt with. And we also got hydrant flushing done, which was indicative of other problems in the system. So our in-house staff has done a lot of work trying to improve both water quality and trying to limit leaks.
Thank you for bringing that up. Our
Thank you.
staff is great.
Don't say that nothing's been done.
No, I can't say that
Something's
nothing,
been done.
something has been done.
No, our staff
But
is.
something you can quantify, not necessarily, we're not there yet. But we have taken steps to improve it, that's what I want to call it.
Our staff's ability may well be one of the reasons why we haven't always done everything we're supposed to be doing from, right? Because they fix so much in-house. I mean, to a point. Obviously, there's things they can't do. Does anybody have anything else for tonight? I have a list of things
got
we're gonna.
more?
Well, no, I have a list of things we're gonna need
To work on.
to work
Oh.
on for 2 weeks. Make sure we've got the timeline. Make sure we've got. I think we decided we want Mark here. Yep. Great. Does anybody have anything else?
Well, you wanted to talk about the DCR agreement.
Well,
It's an agenda item, we don't have to discuss it.
we'll broadly talk about it, but obviously we can't talk about the minutia of it because it's a contract negotiation.
Say again, please.
We couldn't talk about any details because it would be considered a contract negotiation.
Right,
So.
but myself and the administrator met, we've
Okay.
taken made some decisions on
Oh.
courses of action that the town is gonna pursue to get this off the ground.
Great.
That's
Please share.
We both reviewed the entire document and called out things that were done and were not done. We've tried to make sure that everything that the town was responsible for doing for the agreement has been done.
Okay.
And we tried to send all that to DCR. They were supposed to start negotiating in good faith 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago now, and they haven't. So obviously, we're going to send them a letter, a certified letter, and explain that we want to begin negotiations. In addition to that, we're going to, I have a list of 7 or 8 items, scope that we've outlined, that we want our lawyer, KP, to look at, and basically, so that we're ready for that discussion.
Okay.
And they would sit in with us when we negotiate with DCR, provided we can get them to the table.
Do you or the town administrator need the board to outreach to the previous town council who was involved in the litigation that was referenced tonight and the entirety of the negotiations last time with the intermunicipal agreement?
One of the things that's in the scope, and I can go through a couple items briefly. The first item, number 1, is to develop a legal timeline as what took place over the 10 years previous to the signing of the agreement and where we are now.
Okay.
So if after that's done, there's still some questions, then of course we can entertain that, but at this time I'd say no.
Okay. All right.
So we just want to know that it is moving. We kind of jump-started the process. And
At what point do you expect to come to the board so that we can talk about any goals that this group might have as far as inclusion?
I think the first step would be to get the scope to the lawyer and get their report back.
Okay.
I think at the same time, the letter from the administrator calling DCR on the table to get them in here to negotiate per the agreement. We're basically gonna say, the agreement says you were supposed to do X, and in that X is a timeline for meeting and renegotiating the agreement. We're basically gonna call them out on that.
Do you have an active goal as to when negotiations might start in earnest? Do you hope it starts by September?
Yeah, I would like to see it start
Okay.
before September.
So could you maybe be the catalyst for an executive session for us so that we can review with you that scope and come up, if anybody has things that they'd like to add, have fun reading that document.
Unfortunately, in getting ready for this meeting, I didn't have a chance to type the scope, but as soon as it's ready, because it has to go, it's basically what it's gonna cost the lawyer to go through it. You have to have a scope, you know. They could go through the document forever, so that's why we were very finite in what we wanted.
Okay.
So once that's done, I'll forward that onto the board as well.
Great. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Hillary and Pat for coming out.
Oh my gosh, thank you so
Sure you had
much.
better things to do with your Monday night. But it was important to us.
Did we miss anything? You have a big folder in front of you, Pat. Is there anything?
Well, I
that
just
we-
wanted to make sure I had backup for.
Right, but is there anything we didn't cover tonight that we should have covered?
No, I think we really went through everything pretty thoroughly
All right.
Thank you.
at this point, very thoroughly.
I mean, we could talk more about
We
it.
can- we can keep going.
If you want to.
Yeah.
We
She's
could
like,
go
I'm
all night.
here. It doesn't matter now.
We'll talk shop all night, right?
I know, right?
A lot of this information is available on the town's website too.
Great,
We put a lot up there,
thank you.
like the Abrams report and a bunch of other documents about flows and numbers, it's there.
Okay.
Not
Is
that
it-
anyone looks, but a lot of it's there.
Is it all just in that subheading of documents?
No, there's a.
Okay, great. I'm thinking for this one, maybe we
I
want to
think it
actually
says
include
sewer
it
rate.
on your pages.
I think it's a sewer rate or,
Oh, okay,
yeah,
Alright.
something like that, but it's on the website.
okay.
I mean, we also have, I mean, there are tons of reports that we've done in the past, not tons, but there are many reports that we've done over the past 15 years say that, you know, if you're looking for some II history, you know, is there anything that you feel like you want to look at to make yourselves feel more comfortable with the status of II in the town? And
I think the one we sent, we sent to DCR, I think we send them that first.
yeah, you want to,
I
The
can forward that on.
DEP?
the one we
Yeah, the
sent,
DEP.
Yeah, the II control
the
plan.
II control
But
plan
that's
will
what we sent to
summarize.
DCR, saying,
yeah.
we did, here,
Is that a historical timeline of the?
Yeah.
But, yeah, a little bit.
It breaks it down, and then if there was additional supplemental documentation that's referenced in there, that could be provided as
so,
well.
back to the agreement, by means of example, when we went through the agreement, there's an item on like the first or second page that says, both the town and DCR will prepare II documents and show them to each other, and they can review cost and decisions and how you proceed. So I had these great people put something together, and we sent it off to DCR and said, here's our II stuff, where's yours? And we got crickets. Having said that though, when the rubber hits the road and you go to negotiate, you know, we did what we were supposed to, where are you?
Yeah.
So that's the one I think would at least get, you know, because it's a good primer.
Mhm. So I think to answer that question, yes, we would want to see what you've been telling us about II,
Okay.
again, relative to, is it time to get more aggressive?
Okay.
Or do we need to let these new rates settle and then get more aggressive, which might be? Or do we continue down the path we've been going? Yes. Oh, I thought you had a,
Well, I did, but I was letting the conversation.
You didn't want
By
to,
all
you
means.
No,
don't want to
my
stop the
question
flow,
was
did you?
whether the intent tonight was to talk further about the water and sewer rates. I mean, we talked a lot about structure and whatnot. Was the intent of the board to have any discussion on the rates themselves, or is that being held to the future date?
well, we'll do the actual number of rates at the public hearing in 2 weeks. But we did have questions, you know, and Mitch questioned it, right, to make sure that the rate structure that's been presented to the board at least adequately reflects the billing that we've been seeing and whether we're ensuring that we are able to pay our bills. But we can certainly, you know,
Well, it
we're
was
all-
also, the report indicated
right. that
that
it was gonna get,
water was going to subsidize sewer until FY '22.
I think, unfortunately, we'll clarify that for you.
Okay.
Sometimes what they call, that may be part of the recovery of the funds that have spent. It's all in how it's defined in the report, so
Okay.
we'll get you an answer.
I think that's how I read it, but I need to read it again. But we can talk more about the rates if you'd like.
Well, the only question I had, I think it's kind of obvious that sewer rates, something drastic needs to happen on that side. I guess, can I start by asking a question? In what has been the trend of water retained earnings over the last few fiscal years, couple fiscal years? Has
Right.
there been water retained earnings steadily for the last few fiscal years?
So, yeah, I read those earlier. So Joe, water retained earnings in 14 were 342, then 531, 727, 921, and 918 thousand.
I'm not that quick with the math, but for the year individually,
Yep.
what have been the individual, increases in retained earnings?
About 150.
And is it steady, I guess is the question.
It's been steady up until 18. I think we took some out for something, and I'd have to look back at that.
All I'm
No,
trying to
just
figure out,
water.
and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt,
Yeah.
but when I say steady, not necessarily spending it down.
No, we're not spending it
But the
down.
amount that's been
Yeah.
accumulated
Has
for
been
each
steady.
individual year has been steady. So
Has
my
been steady.
question is I think I heard, and I'm not, maybe I didn't, is the water rate, are you looking to increase water rates?
Yes.
And
10%.
yes, if we've been holding steady on retained earnings in water, what is the rationale behind increasing water rate? If we're paying our bills and we have a steady, non-declining, we're not taking from retained earnings to fund the water enterprise, and we're still sufficiently funding retained earnings on an annual basis, what's the justification for increasing water rates?
I know, I was gonna say,
So, Joe, one of the reasons earlier that we had talked about were our electric bills for water, for whatever reason, have been significantly increasing.
But I guess it still drives back, if we've had steady, consistent retained earnings,
Yep.
it tells me we're collecting what we need
Yeah,
to.
this is
No,
the
hold
number I was
on.
looking for.
Steady, consistent retained earnings up until 17 into 18.
Yeah.
They dropped
But
off significantly.
Did we
at
have
that
a
point.
project we paid for with that?
I don't think we did, because
I
I'm
think
looking
one-
at the
one
free
of
cash
I think
use
the
and
question is looking-
water.
Can I just jump in quick? And I can't see it on here, but are you asking, is the amount of retained earnings we're holding on annually? Not how much the account's building, but how much actual?
No, I'm actually
asking
talking
why-
about annually building.
He's
How much
asking-
water retained earnings on an annual basis we're collecting on an
Yeah.
annual fiscal
Collecting on
year
an,
basis.
not the total, but what
Right.
we're collecting on an
Correct.
annual basis.
Correct.
But. Is that
He's
it?
essentially asking, why
Yeah,
are we
so,
raising the
like-
rates?
Yeah, if we're accumulating funds, why are we raising the rates is the gist of the question.
because the FY19 projection of what you're gonna take in versus what you're gonna expend, because of some of the projects that need to be done and the capital outlay that needs to happen to keep the system running, will put you in a position where you need to increase rates.
But I thought I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, earlier in the conversation, that a decision was made to fund all future capital projects through debt. So that's gonna be a separate component, not
That's what
built
we were
into the
talking
rate.
about today.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
That's what we were talking about today, is where that debt lands. Does it land in this budget, or does it land in a different budget? And get worked into your
No,
rates?
it's on this
in
budget,
here.
yeah, it's on this budget.
So I
It's-
think, I don't know how much you wanna get into this, Joe, I think where we're headed is, there will no longer be the divided sort of, we're doing a project, here's the cost of the project, and this is gonna go away. That is going to get worked into the rate. One rate. In
Okay, so
part,
that's
in
what was
part.
meant by the comment that all future capital projects are gonna be funded through debt, but debt built into the rate?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
But just so we're clear, the intent is to also have retained earnings in case of an emergency.
Oh, I
Mhm.
totally understand
Yeah.
that, yeah.
And we estimate it's gonna take at least 5 years to build it up.
Can I have one more question on
Sure.
sewer side? And correct me if I'm wrong, just trying to kind of gather it all, but a large chunk of our problem, from what I'm understanding, is because of I&I, correct? and that's what a large chunk of this increased assessment
You
is
missed a
attributed to.
big chunk of the conversation.
I know, and I
Yeah, we heard that a
apologize,
lot.
God,
but no, it has to do with the rate, so
Yeah,
I'm
we
confirming the thought.
beat that down, yeah, so.
Let me ask the
I'll-
question, and then if it's already been asked and answered, I'll sit down.
Basically two things. One, the rates, we should have raised rates sooner. Okay, number one. And number two, the rate that's killing us is the the DCR rate or the Worcester rate, because we pay on what goes out at the town line.
No, and I don't want you to rehash. My question is this, my question is, in what I heard about the rate, the sewer rate, the revised sewer rate,
Yes,
is that the I&I assessment is gonna go down.
yes.
So my question is if the I&I has actually gone up, why would the I&I assessment go down?
We want to be able to pay for more of the actual sewer rate with sewer rate payers.
But,
But it should, in other words, back to your original discussion about water by means of example. So if it costs us $100 a year to run sewer, we want to collect $100 worth of rates. And then the additional II is in case we get a $120 bill because we have that 20% II we didn't account for. But the intent is to fund the sewer utility with sewer rates. Over the last 3, 4, 5 years, that II money has gone to help augment the sewer costs in addition to some retained earnings. The hope is to actually use a rate that pays for the utility itself.
so why not just eliminate it? If the point is to fund it through,
You could, but you'd have higher rates.
well, I mean, 6 of one, half dozen of another, right?
The hope-
It was always
Well, you say
calculated
six-
based
you
on
say
true
six and a half
I&I.
You say 6.5, six and a half a dozen, half a dozen or another.
It's a colloquialism, Joe.
I know, and I
Up
just-
on
This
it.
is it's
Right.
after 8:30, time of the conversation.
But you can't predict II. You cannot predict the rain.
No,
You-
you know
you
what it
just-
was. But, so the only question is, you know, either you kind of calculate I&I, the I&I.
But you can't calculate II.
No, I'm
You
not able
just
to get my
can't.
question out before it's trying to be answered.
All right, go ahead.
The I&I was always calculated on the prior year's actual I&I based on billed flow,
Right.
okay? So you know that now, that's a no. Granted, you don't know the future. So my question is if you're gonna keep some kind of I&I, why not keep it based on prior year, or just get rid of it altogether? I mean, the reason the I&I rate always got put in there in the first place was because the intent was, over time, I&I was gonna reduce, therefore the I&I assessment could also reduce.
Can I answer that? Because
Sure.
you and I, obviously, I think, and Mitch hates it when I say hindsight 2020, but I think we had these conversations back in the day. I think we did a
100%
disservice to the ratepayers in giving them an impression that here's the I&I project, it's finite, it's X number of years, and when it's gone, and your bill will go down. Because it's constant. Because we were having a conversation that some of the projects even you and I were involved in when we first started have come to pass that they now need to be done again. They have 20-year lifespans. I don't think moving forward we're doing anybody any favors by making them think that I&I is temporary.
Then I think my opinion would be eliminate the I&I assessment, build it into the rate. If that's no longer the plan, if the I&I assessment doesn't really mean anything anymore because it's not calculated on anything prior history, just build it into the rate.
So rip off the Band-Aid. Instead of
Yeah.
doing it in part, do it all at once.
I mean,
How do you justify
we
it?
batted
We did.
we batted around the increase and the talk about the increase and where it is and where it should be quite a bit.
Yep.
And, you know, we did talk about how we felt like a sharp increase would be even harder to stomach than a sharper increase than what we're already proposing would be very.
That's why
harder
I
to
think
stomach.
we need to know what the rate is in comparable communities then, to see where we are in terms of in line with those communities after the increase.
And that is a very good idea in theory, except that there aren't many communities that are in the same situation that you are, where you have this large agreement and large structure of being billed by DCR in Worcester.
So we're special.
You are special, yep.
Lucky us.
It's hard, it would be nice to be able to compare to what other communities are doing, but
Yeah.
no other communities have the same situation as you, so
Mhm.
you're not ever gonna get the apples to apples.
Cause I asked that question early on, we were getting ready for a
Yeah.
meeting, I'm like, can you find me a community that
That has
is
rates
at the
that are-
end of the line,
Right.
that
Yeah,
might
'cause-
be in another agreement like
Right.
this, cause, and they're like, Joe, we can't find that.
No, we don't have that.
Because I had asked that, I think, saying, what are surrounding comparable communities' rate structure look like? And Joe was like, it's way more complicated than a simple number.
And everybody does it differently. I mean, we can certainly do a conversion, unit conversions, but some base it on, some have an administration fee, which is, a $50 a bill, no matter how much you use, plus everybody does it differently.
So is there any way we can go to the public then and say, after this rate increase, the rate is still not going to be exorbitantly high, or is it going to be exorbitantly high compared to what would be paid if you were to live in another community? Like, I know that you can't find the apples to apples, but people want to know that they're paying something that's not unique to them because of the situation we're in.
So not necessarily the meaning behind it, just the number. People want just the number.
Mhm.
They
Yeah,
don't
what do you pay
care
for
about
sewer
the
in this town,
minutia.
what do you pay for sewer
Yeah.
in this town?
Yeah,
We
just
wanna
like
read that.
just
Yeah,
like tax
we
rate,
can
right?
certainly do that. I mean, you all can just go. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody publishes their rates online, so
Yeah,
you
I
can
mean,
certainly
The-
gander at
Some of the
them.
problems I have seen is they bill differently. So some are billed monthly and in a monthly bill with other town services, and some are billed quarterly, separately. And so people are saying, well, my sewer bill's $230 per bill.
Right.
But is that a quarterly bill
Quarterly
or a
or-
monthly bill
Yeah,
or
so,
what?
Like I said, we can do some unit conversions and try to boil it down to apples and apples. Like how much does the average customer pay per year total? And then you have to do your dividing by 4 or 12 or whatever. So there's ways to kind of get around that, but like I said, that's not going to really ever account for the fact that Rutland's in a situation where you're
Yeah.
shelling out a large fee for transportation and treatment.
Yeah, I mean, $250 a year, or $237, or whatever that is. I mean, that's a tough sell for
Yeah.
a lot of folks, especially in the elderly community. I mean, you have fixed income folks, and that's tough.
Well, and that gets back to whether or not we get more aggressive with I&I, because
And I
I
think
know.
that circles back to the hesitation to raise rates
well,
a few years. I mean, part of the hesitation to raise
maybe.
rates.
And now we
when we
pay
thought
for
we
it.
had the money.
Right.
you
When-
Right.
All right,
So it's
move on here.
You weren't coming.
What?
You already went to the group a while ago, as part of a previous discussion.
What was?
That's what you were just asking about.
I don't think we saw it in color, so maybe it
The
didn't.
color helps.
The color, huh? I don't think that answered your question at all fully, Joe, but are we?
It doesn't have to be, just
Okay.
throwing it out there, that's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Well, it's still on the low end.
Yeah.
So this includes the rate increase, proposed rate increase? So this does not include the proposed rate increase?
So we were on the low end.
So we're going to be far exceeding, I would imagine, the high end.
No,
Well, it
no.
depends where these came from. Holden just had to raise their rates. West Boylston also had to raise their rates. Those of us that are on the same intermunicipal agreement, whether it's signed or not, in Holden's case.
You got a copy of that for the 2 weeks down the road? We sent?
No,
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah.
I
Joe,
don't
just
think they
keep,
raised-
just keep resending us stuff.
Nobody else
There.
raised their rates by 50% though, I would imagine, but.
No, we can, I'm sure, get our hands on Holden's increases in their history.
Yeah.
West Boylston, well, Gary's in West Boylston, so maybe he could get them for us. Is there anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Are you okay? Do you
Yeah.
have more?
Second.
All, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Right.